Chapter 836. The third layer of the bottomless abyss, the Forgotten Land. The population of the Golumba arena had increased a lot. Other than the army under the demon lord Sauron, there were also many demons from other planes. This was especially true for the demons of the Scorching Inferno. They had a slight bloodline connection with the Baelor demons, which was why they acknowledged the Garuba arena ruled by the Baelor demon lord. The intensity of the blood war had plummeted. In order to gain wealth and power, the demons in the outer planes now liked to get close to the newly risen demon lord of the bottomless abyss. Compared to the order of other planes, the bottomless abyss, which was dominated by the power of chaos, had more opportunities. Furnace Tavern. A group of beautiful succubus maids were busy in the tavern. Although the other demons were coveting them, no one dared to act rashly. This was because the succubus lady boss here was a private collection of the demon lord, Beheader Sauron. Perhaps these succubus maids were also part of his private collection. They did not dare to offend the ruler of a demon lord's territory. Therefore, these beautiful succubus maids were just looking at them to satisfy their cravings. The demons did not have much of a reaction to drinking. To them it was just a way to show their status and enjoy themselves. They only pursued the slight stimulation of alcohol. Most of the time, the tavern was a place for middle-tier and high-tier demons to socialize. Under normal circumstances, low-tier demons could not be seen in any tavern in the bottomless abyss. Those who were qualified to sit there were at least middle-tier demons and demon mercenaries from other planes. Bang! The door of the tavern was pushed open and a cold-looking demon walked in. He looked different from the other demons. In terms of appearance, he looked more like a male succubus. His body shape was more like a human's. However, this monster also had very obvious demon characteristics. For example, demon horns, wings that had not yet spread out behind his back, iconic demon skin, and a pair of hooves that looked like cow's feet. He was obviously a regular in the tavern. As soon as he came in, the succubus maids greeted him warmly. The succubus lady boss, who had been lazy at the beginning, also came over. The succubus lady boss, Renalise, sat in front of him lazily. She glanced at him and said softly, "Are they all taken care of?" The demon in front of her nodded and took a drink. He then said in a deep voice, "They've all been executed. I'll report to Lord Sauron now." The succubus lady boss nodded and then returned to the bar lazily. Although she was only managing a tavern, the demons and evil spirits in the Golumba arena knew that this seemingly inconspicuous succubus lady boss was actually the favorite of Lord Sauron. She also secretly controlled a succubus army. There were 2 succubus in the Golumba arena that must not be provoked. One of them was the succubus lady boss, who was in charge of many things. The other succubus did not have much power, but she often accompanied the demon lord Sauron. These 2 succubus were existences that must not be provoked easily. Who is that guy? In the corner of the tavern, a Yugros quietly glanced over there and asked his companion who came to the Golumba arena earlier than him, "He seems to have some status?" His companion was a very ugly Ross demon. He turned his head to take a look and said casually, "Him. I don't know his name or his species. The outside world calls him the Demon Hunter. He's the one and only demon in the Golumba arena. He's the right-hand man of Demon Lord Sauron, just like the assassin demon, Keto. He's responsible for dealing with some dirty things. He's good at stealth, tracking, and assassination. During battle he can activate some kind of terrible flame around his body, but it's not the flame of the Balrog. The outside world says that he's a demon created by Demon Lord Sauron with the soul of a legendary profession from the material plane. Maybe it's a new type of demon form. The form of a demon could be created. At present, most of the main demons active in the abyss were branches of the Tanari demons. These demons were basically created by the more ancient Orbis demons by extracting the souls of various races from the material plane. For example, the succubus was born from desire, the berserker was born from anger, the assassin was born from cruelty, and so on. Most of the demons' personalities originated from the most ancient emotions when they were created, and the form of the souls from other planes was more because of what their strongest emotions were when they were alive. A new demon created? The Yugros demon in front of him fell into deep thought and then said, "The demon Lord Sauron here has the ability to create demons? Just like the demon prince, Demogorgon? Why is he called the Demon Hunter? Is it because his role is like the demon-hunting spider?" The Yugros demon companion heard this and nodded. "Something like that. This guy has been helping Sauron deal with the demons who don't listen to his orders since he was born. He hunted down and executed some of the spies of Sauron's enemies. He's very good at tracking demons and his methods are very cruel. The demon-hunting spider was the creation of the original demon prince, Demogorgon. It was a cruel and ferocious creature, and the purpose of its creation was to help the demon prince rule over many demons. It was precisely because of this that the outside world called that demon the demon hunter. There were many similar creations, such as the demon-hunting spider, created by the Queen of Spiders. It was also something that was modified from an original spider. In contrast, Soren's creations were more normal, and at least they looked like humans. The demon lord here can actually create a new type of demon. It seems that his strength is more powerful than we thought. The Ugros demon fell into deep thought and then slowly said, maybe we should add some chips on him. Maybe he can become one of the top demon lords in the abyss in the future. Sauron was only a lesser demon lord at the moment. There were many such demon lords in the abyss, and there were many lesser demon lords on every level of the abyss of the invincible god. Above the lesser demon lords were the official demon lords. Under normal circumstances, an official demon lord would at least control one level of the abyss, and there would usually be many lesser demon lords and lesser balers as subordinates under the official demon lord. The laws of the abyss were cruel. In this long history there were countless lesser demon lords, but there were only a few official demon lords. One of the most important reasons was that there were too few demon lords who could control a complete level. If he didn't unify the entire Forgotten Land, and at least obtain the ruling rights of the entire third level of the abyss, Sauron wouldn't be qualified to be called a true demon lord. P.S. There's one more update. I've been very busy recently. I've been caught on blind dates. Chapter 837. After such a long period of development, the appearance of the Golumba arena had changed greatly. The streets of the town outside had been doubled, and there were many more shops nearby. Most of them were run by demons. Sauron seemed to be different from the other demon lords. This new demon lord seemed to like construction. Now, the Golumba arena was a bit like a large town. Many demons thought that if Sauron did not fall, the Golumba arena would most likely become the next desolate town in a few hundred years. As mentioned earlier, the ruler of Desolate Town was the succubus Red Shroud, a succubus lord who was inclined towards the Order faction. Legend had it that she was the daughter of the succubus queen Mechanut. She ruled Desolate Town and set the rules of Desolate Town. Even demons in her territory had to abide by this rule. Currently, the demons thought that Sauron's actions were imitating Red Shroud. Even the demons agreed with Sauron's actions because there were traces of one or two senior demons in Desolate Town recently. Naturally, the demons were not there to play. These demons were all connected by Sauron through the Ugros. He was going to invite some senior demons to participate in the duels in the Golumba arena. The bottomless abyss was chaotic. Extreme chaos had infinite possibilities, including order. Therefore, the demons could understand if there were one or two anomalies among the demons. Therefore, when they compared Sauron to Red Shroud, demons easily accepted it. After all, there were such examples in the past. At this moment, near the Styx River near the third layer of the bottomless abyss, a strange large ship was also approaching. This ship was called the Chaos Ship. Of course, strictly speaking, it should be called the Entropy Ship. It could be used to move between planes. These ships were made of crushed bones, surrendered souls, and petitioners. These Chaos Ships were used in the Blood War to fight against the devils, and they had the power to resist the effects of order. Although the Tana-Re devils only allowed a portion of the ships of chaos to serve them, this small portion of ships that traveled between dimensions and were controlled by demons seemed terrifying enough. As for brave or reckless travelers, Tana-Re will sell the right to ride the ship of chaos if the price is reasonable. At this moment, the Chaos boat was already close to the crossing of the Forgotten Land. The traces of the Nether River ran through the entire bottomless abyss. At this time, the Chaos boat had obviously moved over from another plane of the abyss. The Chaos boat was a strategic weapon. This kind of warship made up of souls and petitioners cost a lot, and it was impossible to have one unless one was a demon lord. It was even more terrifying than the Netherworld River boats controlled by the demons. Lady Cridiana. At this moment, there was already a large group of high-leveled succubus waiting at the ferry port of the Forgotten Land. When they saw the Chaos boat approaching, the leader of the succubus immediately flew over respectfully and bowed. "I've prepared the things you wanted." Tap tap tap. The crisp sound of high heels sounded, and then a tall and beautiful figure walked out. She was wearing exquisite tight leather armor with small demon wings on her back. Her pupils were slightly red, and she was holding a long whip covered with sharp thorns in her palm. Her body seemed to be shrouded in some kind of strange aura. Even the succubus, who was proficient in charm, could not resist it. This was a sister of glory. And looking at her physical characteristics, she should be a newly born sister of glory. Since the mysterious disappearance of the succubus queen, Mechanut, the sister of glory had become the de facto ruler of the succubus. Many sisters of glory had secretly fought for power and controlled the legion that originally belonged to the succubus queen. The sister of glory in front of him was one of them, but she was different from the other sisters of glory who had been born for a long time. The new her was still very loyal to the succubus queen, Mechanut. When the other sisters of glory were busy fighting for power and planning to replace the succubus queen, she was trying her best to find the trace of the succubus queen. Is this the Forgotten Land, the third layer of the abyss? Critiana narrowed her eyes and looked around and slowly said, "It's a bit different from other abyss plains. The breath of the Styx River here is stronger. I'm afraid that the demons who reincarnate here will be more blank." Following behind Critiana were all high-grade succubus. In addition, there were 2 assassin demons hidden in the dark, and the rarer, Sorrow-Cursed demon. This was a relatively special demon with a challenge rating of level 17. There were not many of them in the abyss, but their strength was comparable to the 6-armed snake demon. The succubus legion was naturally not only composed of succubus, but there were also many other demons mixed in. As the sister of glory under the succubus queen, Critiana controlled more power than many secondary demon lords, and the succubus legion directly controlled by her was as many as 3. Before the disappearance of the succubus queen, Mechanut, Critiana was in charge of the confrontation with the king of gnolls, Yeenagu. At that time she was commanding several succubus legions, and she could easily control these armies because of her achievements. Let's go. From the lower layer of the abyss all the way to the third layer of the Forgotten Land, Critiana was obviously a little more tired. After looking at the others, she slowly ordered, "Let all the succubus leaders on this level come to see me." Note, all the sisters of glory regard the Queen of Succubus as their mother. "I need to visit Her Excellency Red Shroud. The Forgotten Land is an important position in the upper layer of the abyss. You have to be careful of Yeenagu's legion." Hearing Critiana's words, the leader of the succubus hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yeenagu's legion is mainly concentrated in the first and second layers of the abyss. The location of the Forgotten Land is a bit special. However, recently, a new demon lord has risen in the Forgotten Land. His name is Beheader, Sauron. He is a decisive guy and he acts more like a devil. Many demons have gathered around him." Hearing the succubus leader's words, Critiana couldn't help but frown and said slowly, "Beheader? A Baelor demon lord in the form of a Baelor? There's no problem with acting like a devil. Her Excellency Red Shroud also acts like those devils. A newly risen lesser demon lord? Try to get in touch with him. It would be best if you can win him over. P.S. The advertisement on the WeChat public account has been restored. Continue to ask for attention." Chapter 838. Golumba Arena. The arena, which had been quiet for a while, suddenly became lively again. Not only were there more demons coming and going to do business, but even the traces of devils would occasionally appear here. However, most of them were senior demons and they were all sent here by their avatars. The main reason for their appearance was that the Golumba Arena was about to hold a death battle in the lower planes. This was not only an entertainment that the lower races loved, but also a very generous reward. Demons and demons were not completely incompatible. At the very least, the demons could still deal with some demons in secret. This was because everyone in the bottomless abyss knew that many of the weapons used by the demon army in the Abyss Blood War were discarded equipment purchased from the demon army's arsenal through the demons. Even the succubus queen Mechanut was the same. The black market in Desolate Town sold a lot of rubbish equipment from the Bator Inferno. These obsolete old goods were also weapons that the demons could not easily forge, and were often used to equip the demon army above the middle level. The truth was that funny. For thousands of years, the demons had been using the equipment discarded by the devils to fight for their lives. However, the devils would not trade with the demons openly. Instead, they would use the demons from the lower planes as a transit point. This was something that both the demon lords and the archdevils were well aware of. It was just that everyone kept it a secret. The demon army needed equipment to strengthen themselves, and the demons also needed wealth to forge better weapons and equipment. In the end, thousands of years had passed like this. Therefore, when Sauron's death battle invitation was sent to the Bator Inferno by the demons, many senior demons immediately had an idea. It was more difficult for demons to advance than demons. They did not have many means to advance through the normal way, and the scale of the blood war was very small. For these devils who participated in the death arena, if they could win, not only would they be able to increase their reputation, but they would also be able to promote the might of the devils and beat up those demons who were in a mess. They might even be able to gain the recognition of the archdevils, so it would be normal for their status to rise by one level. In the past, there were demons who were promoted because of similar things. A grand death match was being prepared in the lower planes. At this moment, in one of the halls behind the Galumba arena, a series of stifled gasps could be heard. Outside the hall were two beautiful succubus maids. Their faces were flushed red as they stood guard outside the door. From time to time, they would turn around to take a peek, as if the master inside only needed to summon them and they could not wait to pounce on the big bed to serve him. Unfortunately, there was nothing for them to do today because it was another high-level succubus serving the master today. If the succubus boss they were serving today was Renalise, they might still be able to get some rain and dew. But now, it was another advanced succubus. Needless to say, the two of them would be evenly matched. A scorching aura spread out. It was obvious that the battle in the hall had reached a very intense level. About a few minutes later, a wave of heat hit them in the face, and then it ended with a high-pitched groan. After a while, Sauron's figure walked out. He glanced at the blushing succubus maids outside the door, and his expression did not change. Instead, he ordered, "Go in and clean up. Get someone to call Assassin Carter over." The succubus maids bowed and accepted the order. And Sauron set off for the lava pool in the volcano. During this period he had been soaking in the lava. With the accumulation of the power of fire, it was only a matter of time before he broke through to the Baylor demon level. At the same time, on a very luxurious bed in the hall, a high-tier succubus with unparalleled beauty was lazily lying on the bed. At this moment, her delicate and smooth skin was covered in sweat, and her expression was lazy after being satisfied. She let the two succubus maids clean up. After they turned around and left, she frowned slightly as if she was quite distressed. "Damn it." The advanced succubus raised her hand to rub her forehead and murmured, "I've been here for many days. The original plan has all been disrupted. Should I leave or not? Even if I choose to go to the material plane now, I'm afraid I've missed the best opportunity. Damn it. Why is this Baylor demon so strong? It's really a little reluctant to leave." The advanced succubus thought of something, and a blush appeared on her face. Then she stuck out her tongue and licked the corner of her mouth. She said to herself, "Maybe after this crisis I can consider recruiting him. Strong. Intelligent. And he can satisfy me." Such a demon lord was very rare. I wonder where that vicious spider Rose is now. She and I can't enter our god's kingdom now, so she should be lurking in the bottomless abyss, right? Thinking of this, the advanced succubus in front of her slowly stood up. She reached out and picked up an exquisite leather armor and then put it on lazily. Coming here was completely an accident. Her original purpose was to prepare to go to the plane of 10,000 abyss through the third layer of the bottomless abyss, and then directly to the material plane to use the believers who had been lying in ambush in the material plane for a long time to plan some things. But she didn't expect the demon lord here to arouse her sexual interest, which led her to stay here all the time. Some of her plans had missed the opportunity. However, she stayed precisely because this demon lord could implement her other plan. That's right. This advanced succubus was the succubus queen Mechanut. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the chaotic energy from the multiverse expelled all the gods from the gods' kingdom. She who was in charge of corruption, depravity, and taboo clergy, was also directly expelled from the gods' kingdom. What's worse was, the succubus queen Mechanut also transformed the plane she controlled in the bottomless abyss into a part of the gods' kingdom. This meant that she couldn't enter the 570th layer of the bottomless abyss at present. This forced her to turn into an ordinary advanced succubus. The succubus queen had a very amazing disguise ability. With more than 500 points of disguise and camouflage, she could almost perfectly disguise as anyone. If it wasn't for the god-level perception, it would be impossible to see through it. Now, she was facing a dilemma. That was, to continue to stay here and pretend that she was just a newly born advanced succubus, or to continue to implement her plan as the succubus queen. What made her more distressed at present was that when she couldn't reveal her identity and face the demon lord Sauron as the queen of succubus, Mechanut couldn't use the powerful aura of bewitching beauty to control him and make him her slave. And she was also worried about one thing. That was, without the power of the gods, she didn't have absolute confidence in being able to enslave Sauron. P.S. I was delayed by something during the day. There is one more thing. Everyone look at how hard Futu is working. Go and follow Futu's WeChat public account. Chapter 839. Mechanut had been satisfying her endless desires all her life. She was the most powerful succubus in history. Naturally, she was closer to the origin of the soul than other succubus because succubus had been injected with their nature when they were first created by demon Orbis. Sauron was undoubtedly a very good target to satisfy. At least in the entire multiverse, it was almost impossible to find an existence with his strength and physique, as well as being proficient in the most top-notch techniques. It was as if she had made a choice for a long time. Mechanut, the queen of succubus, finally had an answer and murmured, "Maybe I can start from other places first. I remember that I just controlled a witch last year." Thinking of this, the figure of a gorgeous witch emerged in Mechanut's mind. At the first sight of her, the queen of succubus determined that this witch could be transformed into a qualified and excellent succubus. That was why she responded to the other party's prayer and gave her a mark of her own, increasing her strength by a lot. The mark of the demon lord was directly branded on the soul. For the queen of succubus, the other party had almost become her servant. This which was one of the chess pieces she had prepared. Since she didn't plan to leave for the time being, maybe she should consider choosing a time to use this chess piece. Golumba Arena Lava Pool. In the boiling lava, Sauron walked in naked. The blazing lava couldn't cause any harm to him. On the contrary, the power of lava in the volcano was being absorbed by him bit by bit. At this time, Sauron also had a thoughtful expression. "Who is she?" Sauron couldn't help but frown and murmured, "She can't be an ordinary high-grade succubus. Even Rhaenys can't withstand my impact. She can't be an ordinary succubus." Radiance Nun? The Radiance Nuns created by the succubus queen are all commanders. It's basically impossible for them to abandon the demon army they control and lurk around me. Moreover, in terms of strength, the current Golumba Arena's power is probably no match for the Devil Legion controlled by any of the Radiance Nuns. Could she be the mysterious missing succubus queen? At the thought of this, Sauron's heart couldn't help but jump. He suddenly felt like he was frightened by himself. Succubus Queen Mechanut. This was one of the people Sauron feared the most in the bottomless abyss. This was because the succubus queen's seductive beauty was a terrifying ability. Coupled with the succubus queen's nearly 50 points of charm, she was simply an unbeatable existence. She could easily control her enemies and turn them into her slaves. If Sauron was in his true form, he might be able to withstand it. However, if he was in his demon form, it would be a little dangerous. However, both bodies were controlled by the same mind, and Sauron was not completely defenseless. To use a metaphor, Sauron was now controlling two hero forms at the same time. Could she really be the succubus queen? The more Sauron thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible, but he still wondered. The Queen of Spiders has already gone to the material plane. The succubus queen shouldn't have stayed in the bottomless abyss, right? Now the bottomless abyss is the most dangerous place for her, right? The Avatar crisis deprived her of her divine power. Now she can't even enter the abyss kingdom that she controls. If her location is known by other demon lords. Tisk tisk hey. Not only the Knoll god, but I'm afraid other demon lords will kill or imprison her at all costs, right? The succubus queen Mechanut was a true god. She held the clergy of corruption, depravity, and taboo. Compared to other demon lords, she was the most affected by the Avatar crisis. She was almost at the same level as the Queen of Spiders. The Queen of Spiders did not hesitate to go to the material plane after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. It was precisely because the most dangerous place was sometimes the safest. With the succubus queen's camouflage ability, if she went to the material plane, there were not many people who could find her. On the contrary, it was safer for her to stay in the abyss where she had a large number of subordinates because this was when she was at her weakest. Not to mention other demon lords who coveted her. Even the glory nun she created might have the idea of replacing Mechanut when she was at her weakest. Let's assume that she is really the succubus queen Mechanut. Sauron couldn't help but fall into contemplation and murmured, "Then why did she disguise herself as an ordinary high-grade succubus and stay by my side? With Mechanut's means, it's definitely not fun to disguise and lurk around me. She must have some ulterior motives." Sauron thought for a while, but he couldn't understand why the succubus queen would lurk around him. The only possibility was that she knew his true identity, but this was almost impossible. This was a ticking time bomb. But if it could be used well, it would be an unimaginable help for Sauron. He was going to wait and see first. After all, this was just a demon incarnation. Even if it fell, it was still within his range of tolerance. At most, his divine power level would drop by 1 level. Now that his main body had the shadow clergy in hand, Soren would be able to recover after some time. But if she was really the succubus queen, Soren's plan in the abyss might have a very important bargaining chip. The Dread Lord. In order to ensure that his soul wouldn't be destroyed, the Dread Lord left a large number of believers and petitioners in his kingdom. If he wanted to completely destroy the Dread Lord, the only choice was to directly attack his kingdom and then directly destroy the Throne of Fear. Otherwise, even if Vivian temporarily defeated the Dread Lord's will in the future, he could be resurrected at any time. This kind of ancient god that had existed for a long time was far more powerful than a new god. If the Dread Lord's soul was completely destroyed, then Vivian would be the first successor of the Dread Clergy. This was much safer than Soren's original plan of letting Vivian rely on other forces to compete with the Dread Lord for the clergy. This was because eliminating the Dread Lord in this way would completely kill him, and there would be no possibility of him being resurrected. But the price for this was to directly attack the Kingdom of Fear and destroy the Throne of Fear. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't have prepared to descend his kingdom into the abyss. To him, when the time was right, it was time to start a war with the Kingdom of God. Only by destroying the Dread Lord's kingdom and destroying the Throne of Fear could Soren truly feel at ease to let Vivian inherit the clergy of Dread. Everything the demon incarnation was doing now. It was all in preparation for when Soren's kingdom descended into the abyss in the future. P.S. Second update. Continue to ask for public attention on WeChat. Chapter 840. Mordor City, the City Lord's Mansion. During this time, Soren had been very busy. On the one hand, he had to pay attention to the legendary adventurer team that had just been sent out. On the other hand, he had to learn various legendary spells and study the mysteries of the war chess plane. At the same time, inside the bottomless abyss, the news from the demon avatar also distracted him a little. Because if the high-grade succubus was really the succubus queen, Soren needed to pay attention to a lot of things. However, it seemed that he had not had a good rest from the beginning to the end. He had been busy from Amber City to the present, and he had hardly enjoyed any leisure life like other transmigrators. If he survived the Avatar crisis safely, Soren might choose to relax for a while. He would not think about anything. As a god, he would live a few years of shameless and comfortable life and relax his nerves that had been tense for too long. But for now, all this was just wishful thinking. The third phase of the transformation of Mordor City was in full swing, but this phase of transformation was more focused on the underground, that is, the underground network of Mordor City. Ordinary people only saw that many places in Mordor City had been paved with cement roads. It had to be said that cement was really a good thing. It could be used to build roads and houses. The only drawback was that it was not as solid as the spell Mud to Stone, and then the output of Mordor City had not been able to increase. There was no way around it. Although Mordor City had many spellcasters and brilliant alchemy, on the whole, the entire material plane still maintained the level of the late Middle Ages. At best, even organizations like the Wizard City and the Northern Witch Council were at the end of the Age of Great Voyage. The application of firearms had long appeared, but because of the disaster brought by the destruction of the Arcane Empire, many organizations were quite restrained from it, fearing that it would cause more trouble. There was no way around it. Compared to electricity, the magic energy used in this world was more violent and harder to control. A little mistake would be a huge disaster. Even Soren strictly limited it. Otherwise, the Fallen Witch would have already experimented with elemental obliteration. At this moment, under the arcane tower of Mordor City, a huge underground passage was being built. The drainage system of Mordor City was very developed. Soren had already made a plan when he first built Mordor City. Now what he had to do was to perfect the underground network and connect the network of Mordor City into a whole. This was an extremely huge project. Soren and Gloria estimated that it would cost them around 30 million Kindler coins. Even they were shocked by the wealth of the Arcane Empire. They were only in the early stages of the floating city plan, and there were already many floating cities in the Arcane Empire. How much wealth would it take? No wonder the Arcane Empire loved to explore and plunder other planes. Soren even wondered if he should go to the astral plane and see if he could find a meteor made of diamonds. No matter how much it cost. Everything that needed to be done was carried out in full swing. The demons of the bottomless abyss had brought a lot of wealth, and the lesser demon lords that had been eliminated had brought a large number of gems and materials. These things were not of much use in the bottomless abyss, and could only be brought to the material plane to play their greatest role. Then the wealth from the Shadow Church also made up for some of it. Coupled with the income from the treasury of Mordor City and Treasure Island, There was no problem in maintaining the progress of the first phase of the project for the time being. But the second phase might not be enough. The second phase of the plan was to build temples. This was a very expensive thing. Soren wanted to expand all the temples to the level of temples, and the great temple in Mordor City had to be upgraded to the main temple again. But doing so would cost the equivalent of more than 10 wizard towers. At present, no force in the material plane could afford it. Maybe the kingdom of the goddess of wealth could give it a try. The levels of temples were relatively simple. Altar, the simplest, the altar of the god of hunting, etc. Temple in villages and small towns, temple in towns and cities, these three were the most common temple levels. After that were the Great Temple, the Main Temple, and the Pantheon Temple. The Great Temple cost a lot of money. At the beginning, Mordor City spent a lot of money to build it, and then the scale of the Main Temple was even larger. This was no longer a place to serve a single god. Generally speaking, the Main Temple was the core temple of the main god of a divine system, and other gods would be worshipped. At present, most of the gods who owned the main temple were great divine powers such as the god of light, the lady of night, the queen of spiders, the king of elves, the orc god system, the lord of storms, and so on. The only exception should be the goddess of agriculture. Although she was only intermediate divine power, she had the goddess of river and lake under her. Finally, there was the Pantheon Temple. This was the largest temple, and its name was the same as the Pantheon Temple where the gods were. It had only appeared a few times in history. The establishment of the Pantheon Temple where the gods' avatars were now was also related to a greater divine power. Generally, only greater divine power was qualified to configure the Pantheon Temple. As a new god, Soren's current limit was the main temple. If he wanted to build more, he would easily attract the hostility of other gods if he didn't have the financial resources to build it. What kind of strength did a god need to have in order to be worthy of a temple? If Soren didn't master the shadow clergy and advance to the intermediate divine power, he probably wouldn't be qualified to build a main temple. Back to the main topic. Soren had been studying level 9 spells and legendary spells for a while. His core spells were mainly Sword of Destruction, Time Stop, Spell Trap, Chain of Accidents, Imprisonment, and Wail of the Banshee. Unfortunately, these legendary spells were difficult to learn, and even gods couldn't master them quickly. Soren didn't know how long it would take to learn all of them. He only hoped that with his god-level understanding, he could master these spells as soon as possible. Other than that, Soren's energy was used to study the war chess plane. Gloria and Fallen, which were responsible for the arcane towers, and the legendary puppet Alice was responsible for the golems. At present, the high level of the city of Mordor had their own duties. Even Saruman had his own duties. The most important thing for him at present was to familiarize himself with the divinity and further improve the divinity brought by the fertilizer. It would be best to turn it into a clergy related to fertility. After this period of research, Soren finally understood a little bit of the core of the war chess plane and changed some of the trials. He was now ready to test it tomorrow. First, he would find a high-grade profession to test the situation and see if the war chess plane could achieve his ideal effect. Chapter 841. Money Wealth. This was a big problem. After carrying out the floating space city plan, Soren suddenly felt that his generous finances were a little tight. Not to mention the very expensive experimental progress of Gloria and Fallen, which, just the first phase of the floating space city plan, had already cost a lot of money. To use a metaphor, building a floating space tower was equivalent to building an aircraft carrier, which was only a little difficult for a country. Then building a floating space city was directly preparing to build a space battleship, space fortress. The speed at which all kinds of research materials burned money was simply terrifying. For example, Gloria and Fallen, which, even if there was no progress in their research, at least 30,000 kindlers materials would be burned in a month. Looking at the entire material plane, only Soren and Motor City could afford it. If it were other forces, they would have a financial collapse in an instant. Just ordinary experiments needed to burn 360,000 kindlers materials in a year. If there was a breakthrough in the experimental results, then the cost would increase exponentially. Soren was fine before he started the floating space city plan. After he started it, he felt that even if he was a god, it was really not easy to make money to support these two women who burned money like water. However, if Gloria and Fallen, which were successful, the benefits would be unimaginable. It could almost be said that the progress of the entire civilization would be pushed forward. In short, what Soren and Motor City were doing now was almost single-handedly promoting the progress of civilization in the material plane. so the speed at which they spent money was naturally imaginable. Maybe it was because they had been spending money too fast recently. Soren wanted to pull Princess Royal in. Arendelle still had a lot of wealth anyway. It would be a waste to put it in the treasury. It would be good to use it to climb the alchemy technology tree. As soon as the idea appeared, Soren felt that it was very feasible. So, when he had an in-depth conversation with Gloria in the evening, he mentioned his idea a little. He didn't expect Gloria to agree directly. Moreover, Gloria was more knowledgeable than Soren. At that time, Gloria said, "That's a great idea." However, Arendelle also had his own noble forces. If there is no visible wealth, they may not be willing to take out so much wealth. Speaking of which, Gloria got up from the bed naked. As the velvet quilt slid down, her beautiful body was exposed to the air. However, the two of them weren't in the mood to have sex. Gloria waved her hand and took out a piece of paper. She handed it to Soren and said, "This is what I saw when I was flipping through some books. This is called an airship. It was used for a long time in the Arcane Empire. It looks a bit like a ship, but the sails have been replaced with balloons, and a small floating ring has been installed at the bottom. Currently, the entire sea is not as safe as before. Whether it's the South Coast trade, Arendelle's trade, or the Eastern countries' trade, it's not something that ordinary merchant ships can satisfy. That's why I'm thinking of trying to modify a batch of airships. If we can make a batch of samples, the trade between the South Coast and Arendelle can be restored, and may even surpass the past." Airship? Soren looked at it and couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't this thing an airship to him? Why didn't he think of it? After looking at the paper, Soren's mind suddenly became active. He pondered for a moment and said, "How much is the cost? Is it troublesome?" Gloria shook her head and said, "The cost is mainly focused on the floating ring. Currently we figured out how to make thorium, but the cost is still above 15,000 Kindler. For specific implementation, we can quote more than 30,000 Kindler. I believe that many chambers of commerce and nobles are willing to pay this money, and the daily maintenance of the airship can also bring in a sum of income. We still have many witches who lack a daily job." Maybe she felt that she was spending too much money. Even Gloria began to think about how to make some money to support the family. She was quite virtuous. "Good idea." Soren put down the paper and put his hand on Gloria's full chest. After kissing her fiercely, he said in a deep voice, "If the airship appears, it can completely make up for the current sluggish trade. And the trade in Mordor City can no longer be limited to sex. That's a great idea. Maybe we can also contact the Church of Wealth. I think the Church of Wealth must be very interested in this thing that can improve trade." Mordor City had a large number of warships and merchant ships. But because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, sea trade was not as easy as before. If some of them could be transformed into airships, then all trade could be restored and safer than before. Because there were fewer enemies in the sky, the only trouble was that the control requirements were much higher than before. I still need to think about how to use this thing. Soren had a lot of ideas as soon as he opened his mind. The airship must still be in his hands. He pondered for a moment and said, "You can start experimenting in the next 2 days. If it succeeds, I'll go to Arendelle in person after a while. At that time we can first transform our own batch of warships and merchant ships. The trade in the eastern countries has shrunk by nearly 60%. We must pull these back. I think the Northern Witch Council will also be very interested in this thing. You can contact the Eye of the North in person. The airship must need spellcasters to carry out daily maintenance. If we want to expand the scale, we can't do it alone." Gloria also nodded when she heard the words, but there was a hint of blush on her charming face. She raised her hand and patted Soren's fingers and whispered, "It needs spellcasters to carry out daily maintenance. And it's best to have a spellcaster with you when sailing. We only need to firmly grasp the core of the floating ring and the magic energy drive part of this thing. The rest can be handed over to the Northern Witch Council. But this thing also has a drawback. That is, the cost is too high. It is only suitable for transporting high-value goods. Before the problem of magic energy supply is solved, the profit brought by ordinary trade of goods may not be as good as the consumption." Soren thought for a moment and said, "These can be done slowly. The most important thing for this thing at present is to transport strategic materials and the things that are currently in short supply. Let's see Arendelle's reaction first and then consider the next step." After that, Soren picked up Gloria. She provided such a good idea today. Soren felt that he needed to reward her. P.S. Second update. Follow Futu's public WeChat account to support the author. Everything in this book is complementary to each other. Many things have already been linked together. The transformation of the dead man's voice has already foreshadowed this chapter, but I don't know if any of you have thought of it? Chapter 842. Mordor City. Barracks. George came to the barracks early in the morning because there was a selection inside the barracks yesterday. The higher-ups of Mordor City needed to select 3 people to complete a more important task. As the most talented officer class at present, George was undoubtedly trying his best to fight for it. He needed a chance to prove his strength. Shortly after George arrived at the barracks, 2 other people also appeared. One of them was a drow warrior with a cold expression, and the other was a native with a fierce face. These 2 people were also one of the candidates for the task. George also knew one of the natives. His name was Harik, one of the natives who had recently risen. He was a warrior in charge of sacrifice in the clan. After he was captured by Mordor City and became a slave, he relied on his hard work to become a third-class citizen of Mordor City. Then he directly obtained military service in the Battle of the Demon Invasion and became an honorary citizen of Mordor City. Harik could be said to be the idol of many natives. He went from a slave to a new noble class in Mordor City. Only the Order of Mordor City could give these ignorant natives such an opportunity. Are you all here? A man with a cold expression was looking down at the 3 of them. He had dark skin and a glimmer of light in his eyes. The emblem on his chest represented that he was from the church's Inquisition department. The cold man looked at the 3 of them, then said in a deep voice, "This is a mission, an important test. My lord personally ordered to select the right candidates. If you're all ready, come with me now." The 3 of them naturally nodded. There were not many battles in Mordor City at present. They had been looking forward to an opportunity to show their strength for a long time. Then, George and others were brought to the back of Mordor City, which was the forbidden area of the laboratory. Then they passed through a portal and came to a very strange place. They did not see Sir Soren. The one in charge of arranging them was a northern witch with a cold expression. Next, all 3 of you will stand in these positions. The northern witch was not young. She looked like a middle-aged woman, but she had a powerful aura, which meant that she used to be a noble in the north. She glanced at the 3 of them and said in a deep voice, "After walking on these stone platforms, you will enter an illusion. What you need to do is to defeat the enemy in the illusion and try your best to survive. Let's begin." After hearing the words of the northern witch, George could not help but look at the others in surprise. However, the soldiers of Mordor City had long been accustomed to obeying orders. Even if they knew there was danger, they would not hesitate to carry it out, so the 3 of them quickly came to their respective stone platforms. When the 3 of them were in position, the northern witch immediately said something to the air. Then a burst of magic appeared and George and the others felt dizzy. The canyon stretched as far as the eyes could see. When George and the others recovered, they were no longer at their original location. Instead, they appeared in a huge canyon. The surroundings were shrouded in a dense fog, and many things could be vaguely seen. Is this really an illusion? It feels so real. George looked at his hands and then sensed his surroundings. He muttered, "Unbelievable. It feels so real." The other 2 were also surprised. But before they could see their surroundings clearly, a cold metallic voice rang out. "The demonic legion will arrive in 30 seconds. Crush them." As the cold metallic voice sounded, the fog that shrouded the surroundings began to dissipate. Then a huge barracks appeared in front of them. In front of them was a huge weapon rack, followed by 3 barracks on the side. Groups of expressionless soldiers walked out and gathered outside the barracks. "The demonic legion will open the portal soon. Get ready for battle." A general covered in full armor walked out from the middle of the army. He was completely different from the other soldiers. He looked like a real person with rich expressions. This general covered in armor probably had the strength beyond the legendary stage. He glanced at the 3 of them and said in a deep voice, "The demonic legion will attack in 3 directions. The 3 of you will each lead a team to support the front line." After that, the general waved his hand, and someone moved a heavy wildebeest directly. After that, he rushed to the front line with his personal guards. The 3 of them stayed in place and looked at each other. Now that all the fog had dissipated, what appeared in front of them was a huge barracks. They did not recognize some of the things, but they recognized the black flag erected in the center of the barracks. That was the flag of Mordor City. What should we do now? Ido looked at the soldiers waiting for orders and said, "It seems that the higher-ups did not give us a direct order. It seems that they want us to act on our own?" Harik glanced at him with a rather cold expression. After hesitating for a moment, he walked directly towards the soldiers. Soon he led the soldiers to the battlefield on the left. Perhaps because of the exclusion, many indigenous people have not fully integrated into the city of Mordor. Herrick did not have much contact with other officers, and the indigenous people's brains were not very good. They were a little stubborn. Now he made his choice without saying much to them. The drow warrior on the other side thought for a while, then slowly said, "Let's act according to the situation. The military order has been issued. Let's take our men to support first. We'll see what happens after we defeat the demons." Now that he was in the dark about everything, Edu thought about it and felt that it was better to carry out the order first and observe the situation. So the two of them also took a group of people. Compared to the other two, Edu was obviously weaker, so he chose the middle path where the general went, while the drow warrior chose the right path. Soon the three legions set off respectively. At the top of this space, there was also a pair of eyes quietly watching everything. Changing reality, divine power. The figure in the void looked at the entire canyon and pondered for a moment. Then he waved his hand and the sky turned upside down. On the other side of the canyon, a huge portal appeared, and then three smaller portals appeared one after another. Then a dense number of dretches poured out from it, mixed with some more brutal berserk demons and Hezru demons. The demon army seemed to have received an order and immediately rushed towards the location of the barracks. Thousands of demons were like a torrent. It seemed that they could crush everything in front of them in the blink of an eye. The three people who had just entered this world did not know their fate. They were carefully leading the army forward. Chapter 843. George led an army and was moving forward. It was quite peaceful along the way. He did not encounter any battles, nor did he encounter any enemies. This canyon looked very big and there were endless peaks in the distance. He vaguely heard the cry of wyverns, but he didn't know where it came from. However, this leisure did not last long. His long-term training made him extremely vigilant. Soon he found some traces of the enemy. He couldn't help but shout, "There are enemies approaching. Prepare for battle." Ah! A series of strange and terrifying laughter rang out, and then a few hunched and abnormally ferocious-looking creatures appeared. They looked a bit like women, but their faces were very ugly. They wore tattered robes and held bone staffs in their hands. Not good. George glanced at them and murmured, "It's Hag. Damn it. Everyone attack. Follow me." Hag. A kind of demon from the lower plane. There were Hag among the enemies that invaded Mordor City last time. This was a very difficult enemy to deal with, and they had all kinds of strange spells. The soldiers around him were all ordinary soldiers. If he allowed the Anababas to cast their spells freely, half of them would die in a single round. Now he wasn't thinking about where the Anababas had come from. Instead, he was thinking about how to get close to them without giving them any chance to cast their spells. As a melee profession, George knew very well how terrible the consequences of giving spellcasters enough distance would be. The battle broke out in an instant. George launched a charge in an instant, and then rushed to the front of the Hag. He swung his sword and slashed down. Behind him were the soldiers who received the order to charge. Their strength was about the same as the ordinary legion of Mordor City. They rushed towards the Hag who was casting spells. It had to be said that George's timing was very good. The Hag were casting spells as soon as they saw them, and he did not hesitate to charge and directly interrupted some of them. Then he dragged these Hag into the abyss of close combat. As long as they did not have a chance to cast spells, victory was only a matter of time for George. However, at this time a cold metal sound suddenly shocked him. Trial failed. Haruk is dead. Teleport away from the battlefield. This prompt not only shocked George but also the drow warrior on the other side. Meanwhile, on the left side of the canyon, the ground was still littered with corpses. A highly toxic aura permeated the air, and the black mass of soldiers died within it. Herrick was half kneeling in the center, and even though he was already dead, he still remained standing. There were many demon corpses around his body, and there were also quite a few night shamans among them. It was obvious that he had been surrounded and killed by his enemies. Although he had fought to the very last moment, he had still not been able to change the outcome. Death cloud. Judging from the traces of the battle, the human side was almost a one-sided massacre. The reason was simple. Behind the Night Witches, there was a leader who cast the level 5 spell, Death Cloud. This was a spell that completely crushed low-level existences. Any creature that couldn't pass the test of death would instantly die within the range of the spell. Ordinary soldiers were unable to resist the power of the Death Cloud spell, and the human soldiers were slaughtered in large swathes just like that. In the end, even though Herrick had withstood the damage from the Death Cloud spell, he was unable to defeat so many enemies by himself. In the end, he was surrounded and killed. The first loser appeared. The figure in the void overlooking the entire canyon shook his head and said slowly, "His tactical thinking is too bad. He has no experience in dealing with middle-grade and high-grade spellcasters. His personal combat experience is okay, but it's a pity that such a person can only be a vanguard, not an excellent officer of Mordor." Soren watched all this silently. Herrick's mistake was very stupid in his opinion. As a high-grade warrior, he actually let the enemy cast the Death Cloud spell. It could only be said that he didn't know enough about spellcasters, and his IQ was not very high. Everything had just begun. One of the 3 contestants had died, and the results certainly did not satisfy Soren. However, this was his first test in the war chess world, so the performance of the contestants was not a big deal. He was more concerned about the operation of the entire war chess world. Herrick was dead. As he died in the trial, his spirit would gradually leave the war chess trial, and a trace of his soul energy would also be peeled off when he died and gradually integrated into the entire canyon. Not only that, what surprised Soren was that there was a trace of this soul energy that turned into a connection and was sent to him. This value was very rare, and it might even be less than 100 slaughter EXP. However, Soren could be sure that it was really like a network of faith that connected to him. What was more strange was that it was sent to Herrick during the battle. Soren actually got a trace of slaughter power. It was very rare. This trace of slaughter power was almost negligible. If Soren didn't still have a god-level perception, he would not be able to detect this trace of power at all. But he could be sure that this trace of power was real. And it was transformed by Soren's slaughter domain, just like the power of faith transformed by half-elves, shadow, and ruling clergy. This trace of slaughter power was transformed by Herrick's slaughter domain during the battle. The proportion of conversion was very low. It was far less than the power provided by other believers in Mordor, but it was certain that this trace of power was a bit similar to the power of faith. What's going on? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. It seemed that he was a little surprised. Is it because of the clergy? The slaughter domain doesn't completely need to kill in reality? The slaughter in this trial can also be transformed into the power of faith? Herrick's will to fight was very strong before he died. Is it because of this? Soren was a little confused at the moment, but after all, he had been a god for a while, so he could analyze some things. For example, the god of war, the war clergy he mastered could provide him with power. If it was a peaceful time, then the divine power of the god of war might even decline to a mid-level divine power. However, once it entered a time of turmoil, even if the believers of the god of war did not increase much, his power could easily reach a great divine power. This was the influence of the clergy. Soren mastered the slaughter domain, and he also received a message from the slaughter clergy. In the final analysis, the entire trial in the battle chess world was for killing. Soren wanted these trial participants to break through themselves in battle and slaughter. This trace of slaughter power might have a direct relationship with this. Now, Soren needed to wait for the results of the other 2 trials to see if the slaughter power would continue to increase. P.S. If you like this book, you can follow Fu2's public WeChat account. Chapter 844. First, he had to roll on the ground and beg for monthly votes. Without monthly votes, he had to have integrity. Yesterday, Fu2 spent a long time to complete the transformation of the slaughter priesthood in the peaceful era. He had lost a lot of brain cells. Don't you want to give me some encouragement? In addition, if you like this book, you can follow Fu2's public WeChat account and search for Zhu Xing Fu2. This book is already in the middle and late stages. After the god line is finished, it will enter the final stage. After that, there will only be a part of the story of the demon Sauron. Fu2 spent a lot of energy on the whole book. You don't have to worry about the ending. I promise you that I will write this story well, and I have also paid a lot for it. Otherwise, with so many things happening last year, I would have already left when the book was sealed. In order to finish this book well, Fu2 dragged it out for so long. It was impossible to say that some things were not sullen. Now that a lot of things had been figured out, there was no need to fight over temporary gains and losses. If he wanted it, then let him have it. When he was young, he didn't know anything. He had to suffer some losses and learn to be obedient. As an author, the most important thing for Fu2 was always to write well. Smiling at the wind and clouds. As long as I have confidence in what I write, it doesn't matter where I write. If you like Futu's writing style, remember to follow his WeChat account. 8 years. Finally, he made up his mind to leave. Chapter 845. Ah. A roar full of unwillingness and anger suddenly sounded in the war chest demi-plane. Then Haruk stood up abruptly, waving his hands as if holding a weapon, then looked around with a blank expression. His spirit stopped at the moment of his death in the trial. Because the trial was too real, even a high-grade profession like him took a while to recover. This was because he had a strong will as a warrior. If he was an ordinary person, he might have entered a state of suspended animation or even died for real. I'm not dead. Haruk looked around blankly, then his eyes gradually regained clarity. His memory was sorted out, and he recalled that the moment of his death was only in the trial of illusion. It was too real. Haruk couldn't help but sigh in his heart, but then he fell into contemplation, and a trace of annoyance appeared on his face. He died just like that. Haruk was sure that his performance was not as good as he expected, because the enemy he encountered was completely wiped out. After a moment of annoyance, the first thing Haruk did was to reflect on himself. This kind of awareness of life and death was not usually encountered, and the reality of death made him reflect more clearly. Haruk thought of many things at this time. First, he felt that he was too reckless, and second, he underestimated the spellcasters too much. If the army had not been wiped out by the Death Cloud spell, he would not have been beaten to death by a group of low-grade demons. His death was too humiliating. As one of the few high-grade warriors among the indigenous people, although Haruk did not fall down at the moment of his death, the way he died was too humiliating. He reflected on himself. Not only did he reflect on his mistakes in action, but he also reflected on his carelessness and his lack of fighting skills against the spellcasters. Haruk had found many loopholes in his own combat techniques, especially when it came to fighting against spellcasters. He stayed in place for a long time thinking. Then Haruk slowly raised his head and walked down the platform. As soon as he took a step, he felt a deep sense of fatigue. This fatigue didn't just come from his mind, but also from his soul. As a high-grade profession, the loss of soul power was nothing to Haruk, and it was not enough to lower his profession level, so he just felt a little weak. Haruk thought that the moment of his death was too real, so it caused him to feel so weak. It couldn't be helped. Soren's trial was 100% simulated, including the feeling and pain before death. It was almost the same as dying for real. It was inevitable that he would feel weak. Although he only died once, Haruk felt that he gained a lot. After all, the experience of facing death was very rare, especially in a situation like this where if it wasn't for the illusion he would have died. It made him realize that he had made mistakes in his awareness, fighting skills, and decision-making. For a high-grade professional, what they lacked was not the usual exercise, but a breakthrough in the spirit of a certain point. As long as they could break through this point, their strength would be able to touch the realm of legends. For a moment Haruk was tempted to enter and do it again. However, he was mentally exhausted, and he knew that after failing the trial, he should report to the person in charge. But his heart was still a little unwilling to accept this. He didn't die so miserably when the demons attacked last time. He didn't expect that he would be beaten to death by a group of low-grade demons. He felt that if he didn't kill more demons to vent his emotions in the future, today's death experience would be a sore point in his heart. Soren was also observing Haruk's state. It was obvious. After dying in the trial of the war chest demi-plane, he entered a weak spirit and a weak soul state. At the moment of Haruk's death, Soren separated the soul energy equivalent to more than 1,000 slaughter EXP. Most of this soul energy was absorbed by the trial of the war chest demi-plane, and a small part of it was integrated into Soren's body for some reason. It might have something to do with him being the controller of the war chest demi-plane. The spellcasters of the Arcane Empire had always been studying how to use the power of the soul. After today's experience, Soren finally understood why the gods were happy to see the Arcane Empire destroyed. It couldn't be helped. The soul was a forbidden area for the gods. If mortals began to study the soul, it would arouse the dissatisfaction of the gods. This little bit of soul energy was nothing. The natives of this world could improve their strength through daily training in battles. If converted into soul energy, it would be the result of Haruk's training for 2 or 3 days, and this was just ordinary daily training. If it was a real battle, then Haruk's strength would be increased by more than this little bit of slaughter EXP. There was a test in the past. Adventurers trained in the way of the natives' training grounds, and the slaughter EXP gained in a day was about 300 points. This was the early training. If it was a special training method of some organizations, as long as they passed, they could gain about 3,000 slaughter EXP. These training methods were all through training the body to feed back the spirit and then strengthen the soul. This was a bit like the cultivation of the East. A strong body could allow the monks to feel the existence of qi, and the existence of qi would be fed back to the spirit to strengthen the body. Finally, the spirit would further temper the soul. The biggest difference between the natives was that they often encountered a bottleneck. At this time they needed to use special methods to break through. The biggest bottleneck that mortals faced was the moment when they touched the realm of legends. Everything was still going on. Although Haruk was dead, the drow warrior and the excellent officer George were still going through the trial. Soren looked down at everything from the perspective of a god, silently observing the expressions of these two people. If he were to use himself as a standard, these two people were obviously not qualified because they were only excellent among ordinary people. However, Soren still found something that was the drow warrior's fighting skills were better, and George's vision of the big picture was stronger. The latter obviously had the qualifications to be a general. Another thing he found was that when they killed the demons, Soren did not gain anything. On the contrary, when the drow warrior was surrounded by a group of demons and finally died in the hands of the Hezru, Soren suddenly received a little bit of slaughter EXP again. Strange. Killing the illusions in the trial did not yield any rewards, and Soren also did not gain anything during the process of their battle. The time when the slaughter EXP was generated in the trial of war chess was actually the moment when the drow warrior died. Slaughter. This was not just killing others but also killing oneself at the same time. The time when Soren received the slaughter EXP was the moment when the trial participant was killed. At the moment when the drow warrior was killed by the demon illusion, a very weak slaughter EXP appeared. All of a sudden, Soren seemed to have grasped something very important, and his thoughts suddenly became much clearer. He somewhat understood the core of the slaughter domain. Chapter 846. That was the key. Everything in the war chess trial was just an illusion, but the participants who entered it were real. If these trial takers died in the war chess plane, then their spirit would have truly experienced the process of death. This was the key to the production of the slaughter energy. The moment they were killed, they would really affect reality, but the price was much smaller. They would only lose a little bit of soul energy, and at the same time, they would be weakened for a period of time. Because of this, Soren did not obtain much slaughter energy. The slaughter energy produced after the deaths of 3 participants was equivalent to the official prayer of a devout believer. This little bit of slaughter energy was insignificant. However, Soren saw a lot of things because he had just received a notification about the slaughter priesthood. This meant that the percentage of energy he converted from the slaughter domain was not high. The power converted from a priesthood far exceeded that of a domain. Otherwise, Soren would not want to get a more important priesthood. Next was the second point of this trial. Soren was going to test it and then use it to train more followers. This meant that in the future, there would be more participants in the trial, and Soren would be able to collect more slaughter energy through this method. At the same time, if Soren could reduce the cost of the trial and expand the scale, then how much more slaughter energy would be generated? Virtual reality. This kind of trial could satisfy the desire to kill in people's hearts. Human emotions, spirits, and beliefs could be used as one of the ways to convert public security in Mordor City was very good. There was a desire to fight in the heart of every man. Daily training could not vent their excessive energy at all, way of converting so power was naturally different from other Mordor City during this period. Take the Dreadlord for example. The security team was already a little busy, began to spread and the oppressive atmosphere could easily become the fuse of violence. His divine power began to grow stronger. If this trial could be expanded, this did not mean that no one in Mordor City would have the energy to fight in reality in the future. The amount of divine power that Soren collected in this way was not evil. It was the same logic. He did not need to spread death to strengthen his power like other gods. Obtained information about the slaughter domain. Soren could also balance the power of slaughter in this way, reducing and venting the desire to kill who controlled the slaughter domain. But as long as this trial still controlled this trial, then even if Soren did not kill in trace of the power of slaughter, his divine power would continue to grow. This was actually another effective way to increase divine power that he had yet to fully understand. Test of the chess demi-plane were simply too great. That could be done in this trial. But Soren immediately found a problem that was if one day Soren could expand this to the level of virtual reality this required very high-end alchemy, and then the power generated by this method would be astonishing to complete the daily operation of the trial. Vent their emotions. This meant that Soren needed an assistant with amazing computing power. In other words, he needed a very powerful Thaling to help him maintain the daily trial and deal with various situations in the trial. The difficulty was no less than making a virtual reality game. Of course, Soren was not without an opportunistic way. He could first narrow the scope of the trial and control it inside the canyon. All the trial participants would move within this range, limiting the framework to this range, and then enrich the content. Anyway, he didn't really want to create a virtual reality game, but to provide a trial space for people. In this way, the difficulty would be directly reduced a lot. All the trial participants would be thrown into the war against the demons in the canyon, giving them a chance to train themselves between life and death. As for the other framework and content, Soren could slowly add it over time. However, in this way Soren still had a problem to solve. That was how to let more trial participants enter the war chest half-bit wall. It turned out that there were only so many alchemy devices that could send the trial spirit into the illusion, and they were very large, extending to the entire half-bit wall. Could even be said that the war chest half-bit wall was the network of the illusion trial. And what Soren needed to do was to create more interfaces for this network. This was not something that Soren could do with his current level of alchemy. He had to ask Gloria for help. Only Gloria and Fallen which could analyze the alchemy device that transported the illusion, and then recreate a batch of it, and it would be best to shrink it into a specific device. This difficulty was no less than creating a virtual cabin. Gloria and Fallen which had a lot of things to do. At present, the floating space tower was the focus, and he was afraid that they might not have time to study this. Soren thought for a while, but there was still no breakthrough. It's a pity that I can't connect to the divine kingdom now. Soren pondered for a long time and then sighed, otherwise I can try to integrate the war chest half-bit wall into the divine kingdom. This way, I can directly connect to the belief network through the divine kingdom, and use the belief network in the inner layer of the magic net as a carrier. If I have the belief network as a support, it's much easier to enter the illusion of the war chest half-bit wall, but this will definitely alarm the goddess of magic. It's equivalent to directly transforming the magic net into a network. When Soren thought of this, it was basically an assumption that failed. Because although he had a close relationship with the goddess of magic might not be willing to try such a dangerous thing. The magic net was her foundation, and the goddess of magic would certainly not be willing to take this risk. Otherwise, Soren could even boldly create a certain spell with a casting device, and then directly use the magic net to transmit the trial participant's spirit to the war chest half-bit wall. One must know that the virtual reality of the interstellar era had the same structure after being disassembled. The impact of this matter was too great. Soren thought about it and still felt that he had to take the long view. But if it was successful, it would be of no less help to him than the research of the floating space city. Because slaughter was in the process of the trial and death was also in the process of the trial. P.S. If you like this book, you can follow Fu2's WeChat public account. Chapter 847. Soren's power came from the death of the trial taker. The test from the war chest plane involved too many things because it also involved the source of the divine realm, that was, where the power of faith came from. Spirit? If it was really spirit, then the source of faith could not be limited to the material plane. Slaughter could draw energy from the trial, then what about death? What about war? If the illusion of the war chest trial had no effect, then when the number of trial takers reached a certain number, could it completely replace the illusion? Soren gained very little energy through the war chest trial, but when the amount accumulated to a certain extent, the quantitative change had begun to cause qualitative change. As a high god, Soren's life was immortal, so he had enough time to study all this. At this moment, Soren found that if he survived the Avatar crisis safely, he would not have to worry about having nothing to do for the next few hundred years. The preliminary test results of the war chest plane had come out. When the 3 trial takers died, Soren waved his hand to turn off the energy supply of the war chest trial, and then began to sort out the data collected by the divine perception. The power comes from the death of the trial takers. Most of the consumed energy comes from the elemental pool. Maybe I can test the combat mode of the trial takers after a while. Soren thought about it and recalled many popular virtual combat simulations in his previous life. He needed to see if there would be any changes in the combat between the trial takers, because the demon scene in the war chest plane could not test too much data. And the most important point was that the war chest plane was dangerous. Soren needed to ensure the safety of the trial takers and reduce their cost and side effects to a certain extent. If he wanted to promote it in the future, he would definitely not just let high-grade professions enter. Ordinary people might really die in the real world after entering it. This was a very important problem. Soren had to solve this problem even if the collected power would be a lot less. Of course, he still had some bolder ideas in his mind at the moment, such as letting Mordor enter the era of professionals. It wasn't difficult for a commoner to become a professional because there was a great profession called warrior. As long as a commoner's talent wasn't too bad and their body didn't have any innate defects, then they could become a warrior through regular training. The militia training of Mordor City had trained many warriors, but unfortunately, most of them had very low professional levels. They were basically level 1 to 3, and with time they could reach level 3 to 5. If a warrior wanted to break through level 5, then they needed a certain amount of talent and on-the-spot combat. In the real world, the warriors' on-the-spot training either depended on fighting or fighting in person. If the war chess playing could make up for this, Soren could form a perfect balance between the cost and the gain. Through the war chess plane, ordinary warriors could be trained in the real world to make up for their energy consumption. Once this perfect balance was formed, the number of warriors in Mordor City would greatly increase. At that time, at least 70% of the adult males in Mordor City would be able to become warriors. Of course, it was still difficult for ordinary families to afford the nutritional consumption of meat to train a warrior. If Soren really needed to do this, he must get financial subsidies from the city hall. However, the location of Mordor City was overseas, and there was no shortage of fish overseas. In this regard, meat was not a problem. The key was the need for a systematic training model. When Soren left the war chess half-plane, all 3 contestants were also sent out. Unsurprisingly, all 3 of them ended in death. The only difference was that Haruk died from the siege of the low-grade demons, and the Drow warrior died from the decapitation of the mid-grade flying demons. The only one who lasted the longest was Idu. He fought until the last soldier was killed by the demons, but at that time he had killed more than 3 times the demon army. Soren could not help but pay more attention to this person. It seemed that he came from Autumnfall and seemed to have potential. Soren even knew his name. Among the 3 of them, Haruk's personal strength was the highest, the Drow warrior was the best at one-on-one fighting, and Idu was the most strategic. They could all be talents if they were trained. The environment could create talents, because Mordor City had many opportunities that other cities would never give them. Even a slave in Mordor City would have a bright future as long as he had the ability and was willing to work hard. The test is complete. Gloria was waiting for Soren in the laboratory. When she saw him appear, she whispered, "What's the result?" Soren thought for a moment and said, "Very good. But there are still some problems." "Right. How's the research on the floating ship?" Gloria stretched out her hand, and a projection appeared in front of Soren. This was a spell similar to Mirage, which was the research result of the Northern Witch Council. She looked at Soren and smiled. She pointed to the mirror image in front of her and said, "It's almost successful. The only problem at present is the energy drive. Although it can be charged in Mordor City, it can only be done by wizards in other places. According to the tests of my apprentices, it takes about 2,000 Kindler to go back and forth from Arendelle to Mordor City." Gloria already had an independent witch group under her. She was originally a high-ranking member of the Northern Witch Council. If she had the status and resources of Mordor City, she would already have an independent witch group of more than 100 people. 2,000 Kindler? Soren frowned when he heard this. Although Arendelle was far from Mordor City, the consumption of 2,000 Kindler, plus the consumption of the sailors, could reach more than 3,000 Kindler. In other words, the floating ship could only carry out the trade of at least 3,000 Kindler in theory. This was tantamount to denying the transportation of the most basic food and daily necessities, because a ship's cargo might not be as high as the freight, but other expensive goods were not a problem. Very good. After thinking about it, Soren said in a deep voice, "I'll leave for Arendelle in a while. It just so happens that there is a batch of goods that needs to be transported from the Northern Witch Council recently. When the time comes, try to get 3 floating ships and we'll do a preliminary test." After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the trade routes on the mainland were basically blocked by various wandering monsters. If Soren could do this well, Mordor City would soon have a steady stream of funds. Gloria nodded gently, then raised her hand to lift her long hair and said, "Pastor Jean seemed to want to visit me yesterday. It seems that the Church of Riches also knows about this. If we operate it well, we may be able to get a lot of money from it." What was the most important thing for the Lady of Riches? It was not making money. It was to continue to maintain the prosperity of trade. Even if the Church of Riches paid for it, it would be fine because the prosperity of trade was closely related to her priesthood. Soren needed a lot of money now. A lot of money because not only Gloria's experiment needed money, but he also needed a lot of money for the transformation of the war chess plane. And the amount of money would be very large. Chapter 848. Everything in the city of Mordor was built with money. Soren had never pursued any luxury. All his accumulated wealth was either used to improve his strength or subsidize the consumption of the city of Mordor. Otherwise, Soren could definitely live a more luxurious life than a king, but as a god he did not care about material enjoyment at all. In the future, as long as he entered the divine kingdom, then Soren could do whatever he wanted, because there was a kingdom's resources for him to squander. 3 days later. It was a very peaceful day. However, for the residents of Mordor, there were still a lot of novelties today, such as a ship docked in midair at the dock. At this moment, many people had gathered around the port of Mordor, not only the residents of Mordor, but also many merchants from the south coast and other places. At this moment they all looked at the airship in front of them in shock. They weren't unfamiliar with this thing because, from an outsider's point of view, the entire airship was a boat. It was just that the sails had been replaced by balloons, and a propeller-like object had been installed at the rear. Merchants were born with a keen vision to pursue profits. So when they saw the airship for the first time, they realized the huge business opportunity hidden in it, and then they inquired about it from the higher-ups of Mordor through their own connections. The officials of the city hall had met several groups of people who wanted to send gifts and inquire about information today. In particular, some old chambers of commerce controlled by aristocrats on the south coast directly asked if the floating space tower was for sale. As long as they were willing to sell it, the price was not a problem. Business opportunity was only one aspect. On the other hand, the forces behind the merchants realized the strategic value of the airship. Although this thing was far inferior to the floating space tower of Mordor, if a warship could fly and there were several cannons on it, it was also amazing combat power. At least you could defeat a lot of enemies in the sky. The situation was better than Sauron had imagined, because on the first day of the airship's display, many people had expressed interest in it. There were also aristocrats from the Chamber of Commerce in Arendelle who secretly said that they could buy it at a high price. At this moment. Recently, Soren and Gloria were in dire need of money, so they didn't hold back. Seeing that the response was good, they immediately doubled the price. A standard airship modification cost 60,000 Kindler coins. The net profit was about 45,000 Kindler units. Even though Soren had offered such a high price, a batch of floating space tower modifications were quickly sold out. The Northern Witch Council ordered one, the Wizard Alliance ordered one, probably to buy it back for research. Then the nobles of Arendelle ordered 3 custom-made ships. There were many old nobles in the wealthy Arendelle who had accumulated a lot of wealth, followed by 1 order from the Southern Duchy and 2 orders from the Chamber of Commerce of the Eastern Kingdom. Even the Chamber of Commerce, secretly controlled by the Principality of Rossard, secretly placed a batch of orders. Soren naturally wouldn't go against money. The technical content of the airship was not high. The core was still the application of energy and floating space ring. Part of the technology of floating space ring had been sold, but the core material for the production of thorium was still in his hands. In other words, even if the Wizard Alliance and the Northern Witch Council knew how to make floating space rings, they still needed to buy the materials from Mordor City. There was no need to worry about this because the production of thorium required the synthesis of things from the astral world, and the production in Mordor City was not very high. Finally, it was from the Church of Riches. The Lady of Riches was indeed the richest god. She directly placed a dozen orders. 12 airships were 720,000 Kindler units, and Soren made a net profit of nearly 540,000 Kindler units. It had to be said that high-end alchemy technology was really profitable. Soren received the orders sent by the officials of the City Hall on the same day, as well as the deposits paid by many Chamber of Commerce forces. The amount was huge, reaching a terrifying amount of more than 300,000 Kindler units. As long as all the current orders were completed, Soren would earn nearly 800,000 Kindler units in one breath. It was far more than the tax on maritime trade. This is daylight robbery. Soren looked at the order statistics in front of him happily and said to Gloria next to him, "At this rate, we will soon be able to raise enough funds for the second phase of expansion." Gloria's expression was quite calm and she slowly said, "The alchemy technology required for the airship is not high. The Northern Witch Council and the Wizard Alliance will definitely copy it. At most, in a month or 2 they will be able to make their own airships. I'm afraid our future orders will only be from the south coast. In the future, the focus should be on thorium. Making the floating ring is absolutely inseparable from thorium. Even if they understand the technology, they must buy thorium from Mordor City." Soren nodded and said, "It makes sense. But the number of airships should be a lot by then, and the trade should be restored by then. A conservative estimate. The research of the airships could bring Mordor City about 3 million Kindler units of wealth, and these were all in cash. When the trade was restored, the taxes of Mordor City would also begin to increase. All kinds of benefits would be endless, which greatly made up for the current huge capital consumption of Mordor City. In fact, the Church of Riches had always wanted to send money to Sauron. It was just that Sauron didn't want it. If he took the money from the Church of Riches, he would have to give up a lot of things in Mordor City. Sauron absolutely didn't want the Church of Riches to touch everything inside Mordor City. Letting them develop in the port was already Sauron's limit. The interior of Mordor City must be absolutely in his hands. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. Sauron received a message from the High Priest. After defeating a group of sea monsters, they successfully approached the location of the pirate island. But they hadn't landed on the island yet because it had become the habitat of the Quatones. This was a kind of large fishman. Some Quatones were more than 2 meters tall when they stood up. They were far more difficult to deal with than the dark-scale fishmen or other fishman species. Looking at the entire sea area, only the Sharkman could fight against them. There was a message sent back by the High Priest that interested Sauron. It said, "My lord, near the pirate island I feel chaotic magic power. This is not a dead magic area, but I can feel a kind of restriction. It's a bit like a lock, but it's not certain yet. However, low-level spellcasters can easily fail to cast spells here. It's as if there's a force imprisoning the energy here. I suspect it's because of the anti-magic prison, but I'll have to wait until we enter to be sure. P.S. Second update. Follow, Stupa, on WeChat to make up for your moral integrity." Chapter 849. The existence of the anti-magic prison was very special. For a long period of time, it was used to imprison spellcasters who made mistakes. Moreover, there was an incomparably powerful adept organization behind this prison. This wizard organization was one of the cores of the Arcane Empire. Its strength was far more powerful than the current Northern Witch Council and the Wizard Alliance. The name of this organization was called the Masked Mages Association. There were very clear records. The Masked Mages controlled a powerful magic lock. Within the range of this magic lock they could even monitor any spell casting. Since a long time ago, the Masked Mages Association began to sell casting licenses within their own sphere of influence. Only by spending money to buy their casting licenses could one cast spells within their sphere of influence. Otherwise, as long as you dared to cast spells outside, even if it was just a small arcane missile, they would find out and find your location. Under normal circumstances, the first violation was just a warning. But if you violated it a second time, the masked mages would attack, capture, or even kill you. This was the rule of their organization. This behavior was naturally nothing to worry about. Because the Masked Mages Association had long been destroyed with the Arcane Empire, Sauron was concerned about another point, that was, the Masked Mages Association had mastered the magic net monitoring technology. That's right. They could already monitor the magic net. Although the Masked Mages Association used the power of the magic lock to monitor the magic net in a small area, they could find people who misused magic within their sphere of influence, which already represented some kind of very high-end technology. This technology was of great value to Sauron, because if he could transfer it to the city of Mordor, then any signs of casting spells within the city of Mordor could not escape his eyes. He could even use the power of the magic lock to accurately lock the position of the spellcaster. At first, the Masked Mages Association only studied this technology to sell casting licenses, but by the time of the Arcane Empire, this thing had become the symbol of many floating cities. That was, without a casting license, the abuse of magic was not allowed inside the floating city. Sauron immediately relayed the news to Gloria after receiving the news from the High Priest. Gloria and the Fallen, which were obviously very interested in the Masked Mage Guild's magic lock technology. However, the High Priestess and the others had yet to discover anything, so everything would have to wait until they found the anti-magic prison. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. In the blink of an eye, April was coming. During this time, the material plane seemed to be calm, but it was turbulent below. The spies sent by Sauron frequently learned about the movements of the Elven army, including the High Elves who had repeatedly appeared at the border of the Orc kingdom. The battle was about to begin. The invasion of the Orc god system had finally angered the High Elves. According to history, Sauron estimated that the master god of the Elven god system had already entered the Elven court. The war was about to break out. This battle between races was a continuation of hatred. The master god of the orcs had lost his eye, so he had endless hatred for the elf god system. Should I make a move? At this moment in the hall of Motor City, Soren had a map in front of him. On it, there were some markings on the location of the elves and orcs. This battle was a battle between the gods. The result of the final outbreak was very terrifying. At least 5 gods were fighting in the battle. The danger was far higher than other conflicts. Although Soren wanted to reduce the disaster of the Avatar crisis, this level of battle between the gods was not something he could intervene in alone. Forget it. Soren sighed and shook his head. He put away the map in front of him and murmured, "Let them fight. If this battle is not fought, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, will have no chance. Maybe the trajectory of history will begin to change dramatically. Besides, the invasion of the orc god system may have something to do with the Queen of Spiders." Everything that could not be changed was coming. The hatred between the orc god system and the elf god system directly led to the war. A large-scale war would break out on the border around April. At that time, both the elves and the orcs would suffer heavy losses. I can predict the attack of the demons in advance, but the battle between the gods is difficult to change. Soren frowned and fell into deep thought. He could certainly develop in the outer islands for a while, but the outside world was so chaotic. Now the material plane did not have the support of the 3 million paladins. He really did not know if he could survive the last wave of demons and devils. After all, the conspiracy of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, dragged the entire material plane into the Bator Inferno. The plane was not constant. Of course, when the power reached a certain level, the law of the world could also be changed. In other words, as long as the power was enough, even the law of the material plane could be forcibly changed into the space of the lower plane. "My lord." A slender figure appeared in front of Soren. She was quite beautiful. It was a half-elf rogue. With the strengthening of Soren's power, there were more and more rogues in the church. Half-elves had the advantage of agility, and there were many who had the potential to become excellent rogues. Soren looked down at her and said slowly, "What's the matter?" The slender and tall half-elf knelt on the ground respectfully and then said, "A group of clergymen and priests from the Church of the Lord of Light have recently entered the Principality of Rossard. It seems that it has something to do with the identity of the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of the Principality of Rossard. They vaguely accused the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of being a follower of the devil. At present, the Principality of Rossard is in a state of panic, and many nobles are watching." "Is it going to start?" Soren smiled when he heard that. He waved his hand and said, "I see. You can go now." The half-elf rogue bowed and left. Soren looked at the direction of the Principality of Rossard with a sly smile. He was the one who spread the news about the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon being involved with the devil. He didn't expect the Church of Light to react so quickly this time. It hadn't even been a month or two, and they were already preparing to take action against the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon. Very good. Soren glanced at the map and murmured, "With the Church of the Lord of Light attacking the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon, I think she won't be able to do anything for the time being. And the archdevil behind her should have a headache. In this case, the devil's plan should be delayed a lot. I can also buy a lot of time. Then next, I should find time to go to the astral plane." Thinking of this, Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. His strength was getting stronger and stronger, and there weren't many things that were valuable to him in the material plane. Maybe he should consider digging out the treasures in a few places in the astral plane. It was a pity that the others hadn't been successfully cultivated. Otherwise Soren could explore the corpse of an ancient god floating in the astral plane. Chapter 850. After messing with the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, Soren felt refreshed. However, he still felt that he needed to think about the ancient gods because anything related to the ancient gods was too tempting. The average challenge level was above level 25, and there was a chance that it could reach level 30. Back in the day, even true gods were defeated by the ancient gods. Although there were corpses of ancient gods in the astral plane, they could not be careless because they were the oldest existences in the multiverse. Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell, must be mentioned first. Because he was the creation of the ancient gods, Asmodeus' qualifications were older than many of the old gods of today. The only one who could be compared to him was Luo Shanda's previous life, who was once the ancient god, sun god. The sun god fell because of a catastrophe, and the soul of the god was reincarnated into the Lord of Dawn, Luo Shanda. Then Luo Shanda was promoted to the Lord of Light, after the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom. In fact, if one looked carefully, all the sources of power of this god were interconnected. There was an inscription left in the Age of Thorium. It described Asmodeus as follows: In the beginning of the universe, chaos was everywhere. The demons came uninvited, they represented chaos in the first place. Time had not yet appeared, and due to the nature of chaos, demons killed each other in every part of the universe. This chaos was unbearable for the entire universe, so another force appeared to fight against it: order. The war between the order and the demons began. These newly born gods of order are wearing armor made of pure order power, and they have taken up weapons for their ideals. Then they launched a fierce attack on the demons. This war lasted for countless centuries. The gods of order created a holy book to record their achievements. They also created time because they wanted to know how long it would take to achieve the final victory. Gradually, the gods of order felt that there was no end to the demons. They were tired of the war and wanted to focus on other things such as creating worlds and intelligent creatures. They first created warriors with beautiful wings as servants, and gave them divine spells. These glorious creatures were called angels. Among all the angels, Asmodeus was the most brave and the most beautiful. He has killed more demons than any other angel and even more than any god. But as the eons passed, Asmodeus and the other angels began to pick up some of the characteristics of their enemies. Gradually, their originally beautiful appearance became ugly, and the god of order and other angels began to fear them. That was the end of the inscription. The god of order recorded in the inscription was one of the oldest gods in the multiverse. Strictly speaking, Soren's current divine form belonged to the third generation of gods. The first generation of gods were the ancient gods of order. They didn't need the power of faith and they had terrifying divine power. The second generation of gods were the ancient gods of the plane. The representatives were Mother Gaia, Lord of Storms, Father Oak, and so on. These ancient gods didn't need faith in the past, but now some of them did. Some gods who had given up their priesthood, such as Mother Gaia, also didn't need faith. This was a change in the laws of the universe. The universe was balancing the power of the gods. Therefore, the laws of the gods were also changing. When Soren and the third generation of gods appeared, faith was closely related to the power of the gods. Unless one reached the level of greater divine power, faith could measure the foundation of a god. The huge bodies floating in the astral plane were the first generation of ancient gods. They had many names. If one wanted to, they could even be called Titans. Of course, this was just a special name. This was because in the wild field of the multiverse, there was a silent divine kingdom called the Sacred Mountain of Olympus. The full name of the wild field must be mentioned here. Its full name was the Wild Field of the Olympian Forest. Just like the Mechanical Mirror of Nirvana, these planes all had full names. The name Titans came from this plane, and it was also a unique name for the ancient gods. These were the ancient gods. They had long disappeared in the long river of history. Only some huge bodies were still floating in the astral plane. They all died in the hands of demons. However, they weren't the demons of today. Instead, they were the chaotic species that were even more ancient than the demons of Orbis. The full names of the planes represented history and also had a special meaning. The full names of the planes that Soren knew were the Garden of Joseph in the Hero Domain, Sea of Chaos in the Eternal Chaos, Chaotic Tunnel in the Wind Howling Abyss, Bottomless Abyss, Casserly in the Exile Abyss, Hades in the Grey Field, Scorching Hell in the Eternal Desolation, Bator Inferno in the 9 Levels of Hell, Hell's Battlefield, Mechanical Mirror of Nirvana, Xanadu in the Peaceful Kingdom, Mountain Paradise in the 7 Hills of Heaven, Twin Paradise Inn, the Twin of Eden, Paradise in the Blessed Land, Wild Field in the Endless Wilderness, Wild Field in the Olympian Forest, and outer realm of harmony. This was the multiverse. Countless planes, large or small, made up everything in the multiverse. Even as a god, what Soren saw was only the tip of the iceberg. Just like the pantheon, even the gods could only see a small area of the structure. The era of the ancient gods had passed. As for their power, it was difficult for the gods to guess. They could only be sure that they were the original existences that created many planes. Now, there were very few gods who had the ability to create planes. This had even become one of the benchmarks of the greater divine power. And the 17 planes above were all created in the era of the ancient gods. Soren gradually woke up from his contemplation. Soon he seemed to think of something. He patted his head and said, "How could I forget this? The secret of the Knoll god, Yinigu." As if he had just woken up, Soren quickly rushed to the study, and then opened many ancient books. He was looking for something. He was looking for a very old record about the Knoll god Yinigu. On the 422nd floor of the abyss, this is the domain of the Storm Lord, the demon of Obylis, Backhard. Although the betrayal of the demon Tana, finally cut off Bachard's connection with this floor and drained his vitality from his huge lifeless shell, the pain of Obylis' death had lasted for countless years. Now this huge and strange demon was similar to a twisted beached whale. He could not move on his own and could only be exposed to the scorching sun of this floor. Over and over again, the coastal rock formations that supported his half-dead body were smashed by violent hurricanes or treacherous winds and acid rain. Bachard's once perfect control of the weather was inadvertently triggered by the unbearable pain of slow death. Although he was no longer able to speak, Backhard still retained a fragment of his once boundless consciousness. If he communicated through telepathy, he would talk in a slow and melancholy tone about an era long before the birth of Tana, about the rise and fall of the oldest demons. And a trusted frequent visitor might even hear Backhard say that demons didn't originate from the bottomless abyss. Instead, they migrated here from another place after abandoning a race of evil creators that had already disappeared in the long river of history. Soren's finger stopped on this page of the ancient book. Then, as if he thought of something, his body trembled a little. Obylis demon. There's information about the first generation of demons. There's no need to think about the ancient god's corpse now. This Obylis demon sealed in the territory of the Knoll god has at least intermediate divinity, or even great divinity. If I can take away the power he participated in, then I can have the ability to independently explore the ancient god's corpse. This ancient demon lord, Orbis, who was close to death, was the biggest secret of the Knoll god Yinigu and one of the most common visitors. If he hadn't thought of the ancient gods today, Soren would have almost forgotten about this huge ancient demon stranded in the bottomless abyss. This was a very ancient existence among the Obylis demons, and he even had a direct connection with the first generation of demons. And those ancient gods' corpses floating in the astral world died in the hands of the first generation of demons. P.S. Second update. This volume is coming to an end. The next volume is the content of the ancient god line. Chapter 852. Rolling all over the floor begging for monthly votes. If you don't give monthly votes, you won't take any medicine. You're still cute even if you don't take any medicine. Let me ask you, are you afraid? The double monthly vote seems to have started. Everyone who has monthly votes, please vote for it. The prequel storyline of the three death gods has been filled up. The appearance of the three death gods from the previous generation to the Dread Lord has been explained. In order to praise Fu Tu for filling up a hole, shouldn't you all vote for a monthly vote to celebrate? Chapter 853. It was drizzling. A strong smell of blood covered this plain. There was a huge gully in front of them. It was the earth that was torn apart by some terrible force. In the distance there was an ancient tree that was still burning. Even the rain could not extinguish the flames on its body. The bodies of orcs and elves were mixed together. The dense corpses were piled up at the forefront. There were broken armors and weapons everywhere. Not far away there was the body of a giant bear. This behemoth, which was about 4 or 5 meters tall, had now been killed by a giant axe. Obviously there had been a fierce battle here. From the situation of the battlefield, there was no winner between the two sides, but the elves' loss was obviously greater. It was still a peaceful day in Motor City. As April was coming to an end, the impact finally broke out. A war broke out between the elves and the orcs. The final result was that there was no winner. The Elven divine system and the Orc divine system were not much different in strength. Neither side could completely defeat the other. There was also more and more news about the goddess of fortune and the goddess of misfortune. Although the two twins of destiny had not directly fought, the battle in the dark had become more and more obvious. What made Soren quite concerned was that the figure of the goddess of fortune seemed to appear in Arendelle. When he met the incarnation of the goddess of misfortune, it was also near Arendelle. There didn't seem to be much of a change. Time passed little by little, and the adventurer team sent by Soren had arrived at the pirate island. The news from the Eastern Kingdom was also very good. Gloria's witches had built a base in the New World. However, everything came to an end in May. It was a seemingly normal day, at least in the morning. But when the afternoon came, everything in the entire material plane changed. Soren disconnected from the divine network in an instant, and then the divine light above the cathedral of Motor City became dim. At this moment, all of Soren's priests lost the ability to cast divine spells, and all the wizards and priests in the entire material plane could not cast any spells at all. The magic network disappeared. An invisible force that enveloped the entire world disappeared. The first to react was Soren. He took the initiative to connect to the faith of the city of Mordor almost instantly, and then used his god-level computing ability to bestow divine spells to his believers. The second batch of people who felt the disappearance of the weave were legendary wizards like Gloria. She appeared in front of Soren almost instantly and said with a serious expression, "The goddess of magic is in trouble. We have no way of connecting to the weave." This storm silently affected the entire material plane. The Northern Witch Council activated the magic lock almost instantly, and a light rose from Arendelle's palace. The Wizard Alliance was temporarily closed to the outside world, and then a light curtain enveloped the entire city. The brilliance of all the temples in the material plane dimmed, but the first to recover were the many great divine powers, followed by the gods with intermediate divine powers. As for the gods with weak divine powers and below, the brilliance of their temples had been reduced by more than 30%. Something happened to the goddess of magic. At this moment, all the gods in the material plane, whether good or evil, had been aware of this. Because the existence of the weave was not only for all wizards, but also for the space above the 9th layer of the weave, which had been transformed into a divine network to help the gods return faith and bestow divine spells to their believers. But now that the weave of faith had disappeared, the gods could only rely on their own ability to feed back divine spells to their believers. Otherwise, the priests who served them would not be able to cast any divine spells. Soren's expression was very solemn. He glanced at Gloria and sighed, "I didn't expect this to happen in the end." The goddess of magic was in trouble. Soren was not sure if she had fallen, but judging from the disappearance of the weave, she was definitely in serious trouble now. The weave collapsed. Although Soren had shortened the time of the outbreak of this catastrophe and made a lot of efforts, he did not expect it to happen in the end. The weave of faith had disappeared along with the weave. The power of the gods was weakening. If the weave was still around, the gods could still crush the mortals. But now, with the collapse of the weave of faith, the process of the weave of faith had become even more difficult for the gods to recover their divine power. The disappearance of the weave made all the spellcasters feel uncomfortable. Even Soren, who had become an arcanist, found it difficult to cast spells without the help of the weave. It was at least several times more difficult than before. Fortunately, he had already expected this, and Gloria and the others were already prepared. But even so, with the disappearance of the weave, a large number of spellcasters in the material plane would lose their power. Their talent would not be enough to master spells. Half of the witches would be crippled. Many of the witches would only be able to cast low-level spells below the 3rd circle. As for organizations like the Northern Witch Council and the Wizard Alliance, they would probably be facing an even more serious crisis now. The two of them looked at each other without saying a word. The collapse of the weave was a serious blow to the material plane. While it weakened the power of the mortals, it also weakened the power of the gods. The demons and devils would be ready to make a move. What do we do now? The sudden loss of the weave's connection made Gloria a little flustered. She looked at Soren and said, "Without the support of the weave, we will be in a lot of trouble." Soren looked at her and nodded. "Don't panic. You should get used to casting spells without the weave. The great arcanists have always cast spells without the weave. With your talent, you should be able to get used to it quickly. The research progress can be slowed down temporarily. Although the weave has disappeared, I don't sense the fall of the goddess of magic." The goddess of magic was not dead yet. After hearing Soren's words, Gloria couldn't help but calm down a lot. However, at this moment the figure of the fallen witch also appeared. Her expression was a little panicked, but she still remembered something more important. She looked at Soren and her daughter in front of her and said in a deep voice, "The weave has disappeared. I just returned from the shadow plane. The shadow weave that extended to the shadow plane has also disappeared." "What? The shadow weave has also collapsed?" Soren couldn't help but be startled. Then, as if he thought of something, he muttered, "Could it be that something happened to the goddess of night? The weave and the shadow weave disappeared at the same time. Could it be that the two goddesses had a secret battle?" Chapter 854. The month of May had just begun. The whole world seemed to be in chaos. The power of the gods had suffered a heavy blow. They were forced to leave their divine realms because of the Avatar crisis. At the same time, they had lost their divine forms. Now they could not even access the Faith Network. The power of mortals had also been hit hard. Many spellcasters could not sense the weave, and the low-grade spellcasters who were not talented enough had almost completely lost the ability to cast spells. The collapse of the weave made them feel very uncomfortable. They had been used to the convenience of the weave, and after losing it, they could not control the chaotic magic energy. The role of the weave was not only to provide convenience but also to restrain the magic energy within the range of the weave. This chaos quickly spread to the Underdark because on this day the spellcasters in the Underdark suddenly found that they could not cast spells. This was because the shadow weave had also disappeared. The shadow weave, which was originally created by the Lady of Night imitating the goddess of magic, disappeared at the same time as the weave. Not only were the spellcasters of the Underdark unable to cast spells, but even the priests of the Queen of Spiders had temporarily lost their ability to cast divine spells. For a time, the order of the entire Underdark that was ruled by the female priests with great power was challenged. There were a lot of riots in many drow cities, and the male clan members were all ready to move. The weave had collapsed. Although the whereabouts of the goddess of magic were still unknown, no one was interested in continuing to fight. The Lady of Night's traces had also disappeared. She was no longer responding to the prayers of the believers, and the shadow weave showed no signs of recovery. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the underground city of the Underdark, there had been enough turmoil in the past 3 days, and there had been a lot of killings. However, a light appeared on the temple of the Queen of Spiders. The Queen of Spiders, who had not responded to the prayers of the believers for 3 days, suddenly reconnected to the believers. Then many female priests recovered their divine powers. They quickly and cruelly suppressed all the riots, and then took the power of the entire underground city and clan in their hands. The shadow weave had disappeared. However, the gods of the Underdark reacted quickly. 3 days later, the priests who served them had recovered their divine powers. The gods were adapting to the days without the divine network. Even Soren had to spend more time and energy answering the prayers of his believers and giving his priests divine spells. At the same time, Soren noticed that the rate at which his divine power was increasing had slowed down. There was still no news from the goddess of magic. The Northern Witch Council was in turmoil, but fortunately the Eye of the North was in charge. Now the Northern Witch Council had issued a blockade order and temporarily cancelled most of their activities. The entire organization had fallen into a state of retreat. Without the help of the weave, many witches became very weak. Some of them didn't even dare to walk out of their Adept's Tower. It was the same for the Wizard Alliance. The gates of this city had been sealed for 3 whole days. Arcane guards could be seen on the city walls, and a transparent barrier had not disappeared since the start of the battle. The Wizard Alliance rejected all visitors. All of the great wizards had been summoned back, and they were urgently discussing how to deal with the disappearance of the weave. Gloria's spellcasting ability was recovering. She had learned about the Arcanists a long time ago, and now she just needed to go further and spend more energy. The disappearance of the weave had severely damaged all the wizards with intelligence below 20 points. With their talent, it was difficult for them to control spell energy. That was to say, a wizard with an intelligence of about 20 points and a spellcasting level of 6 or above could only cast a level 1 or 2 spell at most. And those wizards who were born with intelligence attributes of less than 16 points and had not reached the middle grade themselves, now it was difficult for them to even cast level 0 spells. Mordor City had also temporarily fallen into a state of semi-closure. The disappearance of the weave required a period of adaptation. The witches under Gloria's command needed to learn new knowledge. They needed to train their spirits and use them to control their magic energy without the weave's restraint. The strength of all the witches was reduced by more than 50%. Fortunately, Mordor City was not supported by the power of spellcasters. After these witches lost many of their abilities, they became the existence that was blessed and protected by Mordor City. Moreover, in just a few days, more and more witches had joined Gloria's ranks. The Eye of the North also sent a letter. The Northern Witch Council also had knowledge about the Arcanists. At present, they hoped that both sides would give up any prejudices in the past and share all the knowledge about the Arcanists' spellcasting. The Wizard Alliance also expressed this idea to Mordor City. They said that they also had some knowledge about the Arcanists. If Mordor City agreed, they would immediately send a great wizard to visit. The collapse of the Weave forced the spellcasters of the whole world to start saving themselves. Fortunately, the second wave of the Avatar crisis had ended, and the new wave had not yet arrived, which gave the spellcasters a short buffer time. They had time to adapt to the days without the Weave and study how to cast spells without the Weave. Or else they would have to face the demon army and the enemies of the past without the ability to cast spells. The disappearance of the Weave made many wizards who were once high and mighty feel deeply uneasy. After losing their power, they could only rely on the golems and wizard towers to protect themselves. In just a few days, many wizards had been killed. Most of them were those who coveted their wealth and the enemies they had encountered in the past. In this case, the spellcasters who had no organization were the most miserable. Those who were protected by forces could hide in a safe place for a while. The magic lock of the Northern Witch Council had been closed for 3 days. The wizard city was completely closed to the outside world. Princess Royal of Arendelle also sent a magic message to Soren. Now the spellcasters' organizations in the entire material plane were dealing with the problems after the collapse of the Weave. Gloria's witches group increased rapidly. At the same time, the scattered wizards of the City of Wealth, Port Tylon, and Shipwreck Bay also rushed to Mordor City. They were seeking protection from Soren, and most of them were under Saruman's command. Without the Weave, they might not even be able to defeat a middle-grade warrior. At this moment of life and death, the once high and mighty spellcasters had to bow their heads and seek refuge in organizations that could temporarily shelter them. The spellcasters of Mordor City had increased to 600 or 700. But even with so many spellcasters, Soren was now facing a problem. That was, only a small part of them had the ability to become Arcanists. Most of the spellcasters had to find other ways to restore their power. Finally, after a whole day of discussion, the Northern Witch Council, Arendelle's Ice Witches, the Mordor City Wizard Legion, the Wizard Alliance and other organizations decided to share knowledge in the future. They must work together to solve the problem caused by the collapse of the Weave. P.S. Second update. Seeking attention and recommendation tickets from the public account. Chapter 855. The Goddess of Magic and Lady of Night had an accident at the same time. Although it was not known whether the secret struggle between the two goddesses had an accident or something else had happened. However, the nerves of the gods were obviously nervous because this was the first time since the Avatar crisis that a greater divine power had an accident. Although gods had fallen in the past, they were all weak and weak. Although the Shadow Lord who died in the hands of Soren was a mid-level divine power, he was alone after all. But the Goddess of Magic and Lady of Night were different. Both of them were greater divine powers and had a group of gods serving them. The Weave and the Shadow Weave collapsed at the same time. Two greater divine powers disappeared together, and all believers and priests could not get their response. The Church of Lady of Night was a little better. After all, there were many other professions, but the fate of the organization serving the Goddess of Magic was very tragic. Because there were too many spellcasters, the collapse of the Weave directly led to a great reduction in power. Many evil gods who once had a grudge against the Goddess of Magic were secretly moving. But at this time many other gods also stood up. The Lady of Silvermoon was the first god to stand up publicly to shelter the believers of the Goddess of Magic. In a sense, she was also the mother of the Goddess of Magic. Without her struggle with Lady of Night, there would be no Goddess of Magic. With the Lady of Silvermoon taking the lead, the rest was much easier. Many good gods temporarily sheltered the Church of the Goddess of Magic. Even the Goddess of Love, who had always been casual, stood up. The mother gods in this world were still relatively powerful. After all, the existence of the Goddess of Magic was very special. Many gods needed to rely on the faith network of the Weave. So after she disappeared, many people were looking for her. Even the gods who did not have a good relationship with her would contribute a little. Because the gods had cut off their connection with the divine kingdom, If they could not even connect to the faith network, their power would be too weak. Recently there were many more spellcasters in Motor City. Not only members from the Northern Witch Council, but also the top members of the Wizard Alliance and Arendelle's Ice Witches. Spellcasters, who were rarely seen in the past, began to appear more often now, and most of them were in a hurry. Many of them lived directly near the library in Motor City. Mordor City was on high alert during this period of time. Any slight disturbance might lead to interrogation by the guards. The number of guards patrolling the port area was also 50% higher than before. How's the progress? Soren went to the war chest plane for a bit. After he came back, he immediately went to Gloria's laboratory and asked, "What are the results of your research so far?" There was a pile of books in front of Gloria. Next to her were the Fallen Witch and Alice, both of whom looked exhausted. The collapse of the weave made them feel a little haggard. A little. Gloria put down the book in her hand and said slowly, "At present, through the communication with the Northern Witch Council and the Wizard Alliance, we found that the biggest difference between the spellcasting of the Arcane Empire and the current spellcasting is the analysis of spell models. During the time of the Arcane Empire, most spellcasters completely construct spell models. This will slow down their learning speed, but it will give them a deeper understanding of spells. But today's spellcasting relies on spells. Some low-level wizards who are not talented enough can't complete the construction of spell models at all. They can only rely on repeated meditation and spells to form a spell model with the help of the weave. The weave was a connector and a storage device. Soren knew this for a long time because the spell slots he mastered were stored on the weave. If a wizard did not change the spell stored in the spell slot, he could regain the spell with a little meditation. This convenience allowed many wizards with insufficient talent to gain the ability to cast spells, but it also made them dependent on it. Many wizards' spell slots were fixed, and the spells stored in them may not be changed for a long time. With their calculation and understanding ability, they did not fully understand the structure of spell models. Spell models, huh? Soren couldn't help but think back to when he first learned spells. He didn't seem to understand the spells much. Perhaps it was an innate belief that the weave would collapse sooner or later, so Soren started learning spells by constructing spell models. Most of the low-grade magi started with meditation and incantations. Some didn't even know what spell models were. They relied entirely on repeating contact incantations to communicate with the weave, and finally mastered the most basic level, 0 cantrips. Gloria took out a blueprint and showed it to Soren, then said, "Our current test results show that after leaving the weave, most wizards have lost the ability to cast high-level spells. With their intelligence, they can't complete the construction of high-level spell models on their own. The weave provides the convenience of storage and allows magi to obtain more spells. But now that the weave has collapsed, the storage function of the weave has been lost. If a wizard wants to regain the ability to cast spells, they have to memorize spell models again. We've already tested a portion of them. After reconstructing the spell models, more than 50% of the witches were able to cast low-level spells. However, this is only limited to the low-level spells that they have mastered. Normal spellcasters don't have enough memory and understanding. Apart from a few talented wizards, the rest can only recover 3 to 5 types of low-level spells. Any more and it'll be beyond their abilities. However, the test results also showed an interesting phenomenon. After leaving the weave, spellcasters are no longer limited by spell slots. The key to determining how many spells they can cast is their spiritual force and their own mana. Their spellcasting level did not decrease. Our preliminary test results show that a mid-level or high-level wizard who has lost all his other spells can cast Fireball continuously more than 10 times after memorizing the spell model. The number of times they can cast spells is not much different from the number of spell slots they had in the past. Soren couldn't help but fall into silence after hearing this. After pondering for a moment, he raised his head and said, "Simply put, the only difference is that their mana has not decreased. The only difference is that without the weave, they are unable to master many spells. But the spells that they have mastered can be cast many times with their original strength?" The Fallen Witch also raised her head at this time and nodded, "Yes. The results of our research with the Wizard Alliance is that most of the mid-level and low-level wizards do not have the ability to become arcanists. This means that if the weave is not restored, they will only be able to memorize a few spells in their lifetime. They can cast these spells repeatedly like warlocks. However, if they memorize too many spell models and their own memory and comprehension are not enough, I'm afraid that it will cause a serious backlash. They will only be able to become a single type of spellcaster in the future. All the test results show that only those who are extremely talented can cast spells freely like arcanists. Soren was stunned after hearing this. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The era of blue spellcasting has finally arrived. The old spellcasters have fallen to the mortal world. In the future, apart from the geniuses who have the talent to become arcanists, the other spellcasters will only be able to become a single type of cannon. The weave was a storage device. Now that they didn't have this storage device, it would be very difficult for them to memorize the complicated spell models with the brains of ordinary people. The only thing they could do now was to try their best to memorize the few spells that they were most familiar with. Chapter 856. After the collapse of the Magic Network. Originally, the one-time memory of the wizards with the help of the Magic Network storage device had to become permanent memory because there were no more spell slots to help them preserve these completed spell models. There was a little detail here. In the past, it took the longest time for wizards to memorize the spell slots. After completing the memory of the spell slots, as long as the spell was cast in the future, it would take very little time to refill the spell slots. Even wizards with poor talent could completely memorize all the spells stored in the spell slots in 8 hours at most. This was one of the biggest functions of the Magic Network. Now that it had lost this function, many wizards had to complete the structure of these spell models independently. The only fortunate thing was that the strength of these spellcasters was still there. That was, the most basic power of the will and the mana accumulated through meditation were still there. For example, Gloria showed Soren an example. A mid-grade magus by the name of Karel. His talent was not high. It was estimated that his intelligence was barely 18 to 20 points, including the profession bonus. His original spellcasting level was around level 8. After the collapse of the Magic Network, he completely lost all his spells. However, after the test in Mordor City and the Wizard Alliance, he remastered the most basic level 1 spell, Arcane Missile, through continuous practice. At present, this was the only level 1 spell he could cast. In the case of only being able to remember to cast this spell, he could cast Arcane Missile more than 30 times in a row before exhausting his power. This meant that his original ability had not disappeared. It was just that he had lost the Magic Network and could no longer master other spells. For a long time in the future, he would only be able to cast some very low-level spells. What are you going to do now? Soren frowned and looked at the results of the test carried out by Gloria and others. He slowly said, "There are still many wizards who can't cast spells. We must solve this problem as soon as possible. At least let them protect themselves." Gloria nodded and said, "I know. So the result of our discussion is to let them rememorize the spells they are most familiar with and most commonly used. At present, we can only let them learn warlock techniques, and through repeated practice, they will be able to master spells again. However, in the future, I'm afraid it will be difficult for these people to learn new spells. The types of spells they have mastered may be even less than warlocks. Warlocks relied on their innate ability to cast spells. After the collapse of the Weave, the high and mighty spellcasters would only be able to grasp a few spells through constant communication, unless they met the requirements to become arcanists. The Weave also existed during the Arcane Empire. A large number of low-ranked spellcasters relied on the Weave to cast spells. However, arcanists generally avoided the Weave, and if one advanced to become a great arcanist, there would be no problem with the Weave. How's the great Taoist master? Soren thought for a moment and asked, did the Archmage's spellcasting abilities decrease? The one who answered him was the Fallen Witch. She slowly said, the great wizard's abilities didn't decrease too much. With their talent and understanding of magic, even without the Weave, they would be able to cast most magic. However, there will definitely be some effects. The effects they received should be similar to ours. They need to memorize all the spells again. The Fallen Witch's innate ability was astonishing. She could rely on a person's memory to dismantle and reassemble such a complicated, elemental furnace. Her memory and comprehension were simply at the level of a scientist. The great wizards were all spellcasters who had advanced to become legends. Their innate abilities were outstanding. Even if the Weave collapsed, they could easily memorize all the spells. This was something worth rejoicing over. After the collapse of the Weave, although the lower-ranked wizards were heavily injured, the wizards above the legend rank weren't affected too much. Then what about your current strength? Soren thought for a moment and asked, do you think your strength has decreased or increased? Gloria frowned and hesitated for a moment before slowly saying, I'm not too sure. However, one thing is certain. After the collapse of the weave, the spells we can use have become much more flexible. Although the original spell slots provided convenience for spellcasters, it also limited the abilities of those with outstanding innate abilities. In the past, when we used spells, we had to limit ourselves to the contents of the spell slots. But now we can use all the spells we know at will. The only way we can use spells is by our spiritual force and mana. Before our mana and spiritual force are exhausted, we can use spells at will. We haven't tested it yet, so I'm not sure if our strength has decreased or increased. Moreover, the convenience of the weave makes it easier to use spells. After leaving the weave, according to our preliminary calculations, the total number of spells we can use should have decreased by around 30%. The weave was a framework, but it was also a restriction. A first circle spell slot could only store first circle spells. Although the usage was maximized, the framework was still there. No one could escape the restrictions of the goddess of magic. Now that the weave had collapsed, without this framework there was no longer this convenience. Relying on one's own ability to use the weave would definitely not be able to compare to it, so the total number of spells they could use had decreased. Of course, unless one only remembered first circle spells, the number of spells they could use would increase exponentially. This was because all the second circle spell slots had been converted into first circle spells. How long will it take for these spellcasters to recover their combat strength? Soren asked the most important question. Gloria pondered for a long time before saying, "It's hard to say. Now, it depends on their innate abilities. I estimate that in about a month, most of the spellcasters will recover some spells. But some of them may only be able to use level 0 spells in the future." Without the weave, the reality was cruel. Spellcasters who were not geniuses or quasi-geniuses would be able to use level 0 spells in the future. The existence of the weave naturally had its reasons. The age of thorium was so glorious, but after the death of the first goddess of magic, it was destroyed in history. An arcane civilization could not be supported by the geniuses at the top. If magic was to be popularized, it had to rely on the power of the weave. If the weave could not be restored, the current batch of spellcasters would be slightly better off. From now on, without the help of the weave, it would be much more difficult for anyone to become a wizard. Soren conservatively estimated that they would need at least 18 points of intelligence to become wizard apprentices and master the lowest level 0 spells. After that, they would be able to learn first circle spells when they reached level 4. Note, because wizards can only reach 20 points of intelligence when they reach level 4. The current batch of wizards had accumulated experience and training in the past, so most of their intelligence had already reached 20 points due to their profession level. In the future, the number of wizards would plummet. Without the weave, if it could not be restored or replaced, then the age of chaos would gradually arrive. In the end, the number of spellcasters would become fewer and fewer. Chapter 857. Chidian's backend was going crazy. Fu 2 had already changed the chapter after the repetition yesterday. Those who had already subscribed did not need to subscribe again. The content had already been changed to the third chapter. The new backend was not very useful. Everyone please bear with it. Fu 2 would not deliberately repeat the chapter, otherwise I would have already activated the anti-piracy function. That's all. Chapter 858. A civilization couldn't be supported by a few people. For example, although Motor City had a lot of very sophisticated alchemy technology, the only thing that could be popularized was the magic street lamps. But even just the magic street lamps required a group of low-grade wizards to check and maintain them regularly. As for the golem factories, which had more advanced alchemy technology, there were more than 2 digits of spellcasters for daily maintenance. Usually, if there was any damage to the golem puppets, these things all needed low-grade spellcasters to do. It could be said that without these low-grade spellcasters, Gloria wouldn't have enough time and energy to study. The same principle could be applied everywhere. Cutting-edge experiments could rely on the power of geniuses, but popularization and maintenance required a lot of low-grade manpower. The collapse of the magic net meant that the difficulty of Soren's plan for the floating city skyrocketed. Losing a large number of low-grade wizards would make it difficult to maintain the floating city in the future. This was the same in other civilizations. Scientists discovered a lot of important knowledge, but in the end, countless workers and scholars were needed to promote the overall process of the civilization. The collapse of the magic net was a sign of the end of the era. Looking at the long history of the multiverse, most of the times that could be called interstellar civilizations relied on the magic net to establish themselves. Otherwise, wizards would be the representatives of mystery. Although there weren't many wizards in the material plane because of the magic net, wizards could be seen in almost every town. But if there was no magic net in the future, it would be difficult to see wizards even in big cities. Soren sat in the hall and pondered. He frowned slightly and murmured, "The magic net collapsed in the end. In this case, what about my plan for the floating city?" The power of the magic net was controlled by the goddess of magic. If possible, Soren didn't want to see the magic net disappear because the era without the magic net was a sad era. Where is the goddess of magic now? Did she fall? Soren looked out of the window and whispered, "If the goddess of magic falls, the new successor can regain control of the power of the magic net. Similarly, the magic net will be repaired. In the current situation, should I implement Plan B or Plan C?" The fall of the goddess of magic was inevitable in the original history. Although Soren had helped the goddess of magic survive the first crisis, he was still unable to prevent the collapse of the magic net. The only thing he could do was to ensure that the goddess of magic was still alive even though she was missing. The collapse of the weave was one of the most critical factors in the Avatar crisis. That was why Soren had a backup plan a long time ago. Helping the goddess of magic was Plan A that Soren had prepared, and it seemed like Plan A had failed. Because the weave had already disappeared. Soren was a person who was used to acting after making up his mind. Of course, he didn't only have one plan. He had two other backup plans. For example, Plan B. In Soren's original plan, if the goddess of magic couldn't escape the fate of death, then he would turn around and help the Silvermoon Lady obtain the power of the goddess of magic. Because the Lady of Silvermoon was one of the creators of the goddess of magic, she could replace the goddess of magic to repair the divine network. Of course. Other than that, Soren also had a Plan C. This plan was much bolder, and he only thought of it after advancing to the mid-level divine power. Because the current goddess of magic, Midnight, used to be just an ordinary witch. She became a god because she inherited the power of the goddess of magic. If Soren had enough cards up his sleeve, he might be able to try to help someone get the priesthood of the goddess of magic. For example, Gloria or Fallen Witch. The difficulty of Plan C was extremely high. But it wasn't completely impossible. Anything could happen in the time of troubles. There were many mortals who became gods in the original history. It was naturally not impossible to seize the priesthood of the goddess of magic from the hands of the gods. But if Soren did this, he would have to face too many enemies. After all, this was a priesthood of greater divine power. To be honest, Gloria or Fallen Witch's abilities were not enough to control the power of the goddess of magic. There was only one way for Gloria to obtain the priesthood of magic. Soren could seize the power of the priesthood and transfer it to her, allowing her to become a god as a mortal. The weave. The shadow weave. Soren frowned as he pondered. He seemed to be hesitating as he muttered, "I have the priesthood of shadow and I am an arcanist. Then? Can I try to obtain or create something similar to the shadow weave?" Soren didn't dare to think about the real shadow weave. But if it was the shadow weave, Soren felt that there was a slight possibility. After all, his control over the shadow plane was very strong. And when Mistress Night first created the shadow weave, it was limited to the Underdark. Mistress Night wasn't a pure spellcaster. She was an ancient god, and her profession was closer to that of a rogue. She had many similarities with Soren. Mistress Night's profession must be mentioned. She was rogue, shadow dancer, assassin, warlock, and shadow manipulator. And Soren's current profession was rogue, shadow dancer, wizard, and arcanist. Wasn't it very similar? That's right. Soren and Mistress Night's professions were very similar. It could even be said that they were of the same school. The biggest difference was that Mistress Night was a warlock spellcaster, while Soren was a wizard spellcaster. Perhaps Soren was still far from reaching Mistress Night's level of ability. But what if it was just a small area of the shadow weave? With the power of the shadow priesthood and the ability of the shadow plane, could Soren build a small area of the shadow plane that covered the vicinity of Mordor City? It was very possible. The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. However, he still lacked the most important part, and that was to obtain a priesthood related to magic, the shadow weave, and the mystery plane. He must first obtain such a priesthood before he could try to imitate the shadow weave. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to succeed. The existence of the shadow weave relied on the power of the priesthood. Without a priesthood related to magic, Soren didn't even have the basic ability to build a magic network. P.S. That's all for today. Next, you have to think about it. Chapter 859. The collapse of the shallow weave did not affect Soren much. However, the collapse of the faith network had a very serious impact on Soren. With the collapse of the faith network, Soren's workload of responding to the prayers of the believers suddenly increased several times. Soren's intention to get involved with the shadow weave was to establish his own faith network in the future. Otherwise, it would not be a good way to collect faith with the help of the outside world. Soren did not like to be controlled by others. The power that could be controlled by oneself was the most effective. A week passed in the blink of an eye. The research led by the Wizard Alliance, the Northern Witch Council, the Arendelle Ice Witches, and the city of Mordor finally began to show results. Many adepts had already mastered the spells they were most familiar with through repeated practice. As for how much strength they could recover in the future, it depended on their individual talent and hard work. Speaking of which, after the collapse of the weave, a good thing happened. That was, a benchmark to measure the talent of a wizard had appeared. In the past, everyone used the power of the weave to cast spells. It was like a group of students studying at the same time. Their IQs were similar without special tests. At most, some people studied better and some studied worse. Some were more serious and some were more lazy. But after the collapse of the weave, everyone's talent had a direct measurement, and all of a sudden, all the geniuses among the wizards were distinguished from ordinary people. These quasi-geniuses or genius-level spellcasters easily memorized the spell models and gradually became qualified to become arcanists. After the disappearance of the weave, such geniuses continued to emerge. In the beginning, everyone used the power of the weave to cast spells. Even if there was a gap in intelligence, the difference was only the number of spell slots mastered and the speed of learning spells. It was not a very obvious benchmark. Now that the weave had disappeared, most of the geniuses stood out, and these people had become the key to many forces. Even the city of Mordor had 2 or 3 witches with innate intelligence above 20. These people were all accepted as apprentices by Gloria, ready to train them into future arcanists. At this time, in the council hall of Mordor City, Soren, Gloria, Saruman, Fallen Witch and others sat together. What? Gloria froze for a moment after hearing Soren's words. She then murmured, "You mean? Are you going to open a school in Mordor? Not an aristocratic school? Is it a completely universal school?" As soon as Gloria's voice fell, everyone else's expression was a little surprised. The level of knowledge in this world was very low. It belonged to the most standard elite education model. Knowledge was always in the hands of the upper echelons of society. Ordinary civilians would find it difficult to even be literate. Some people could barely write their own names in their entire lives. Only merchants, nobles and professionals could grasp more knowledge. In fact, many commoners joined the churches of the gods because the churches would also impart knowledge to the commoners. Yes, Soren had wanted to do this for a long time, but now he felt that the time was right. He looked at the others and said in a deep voice, "I'm going to open a school." Because of the collapse of the magic network, the number of spellcasters in Mordor City has suddenly increased. In the past, there were not so many scholars to impart knowledge in Mordor City, but now there are so many wizards in Mordor City. Even if many spellcasters are not strong, the knowledge they have accumulated is very valuable. Mordor City needs a lot of talents in the future. Not only talents with the potential to become wizards, but also talents in other aspects. I'm going to try a new model. You can call it assembly line production. Let those ordinary people who are not talented enough master a certain part of a certain job. Through repeated practice they will become more proficient. Finally, the whole process will be composed of different divisions of labor. The knowledge of wizards was far beyond other professions. Today there were many low-grade wizards in Mordor City. They retained less than 30% of their spellcasting ability, but the knowledge accumulated in the past did not disappear. If he didn't use them, would Soren raise them for nothing? As long as they took turns teaching, even if a person only taught for 1 day in a week, it was enough to teach ordinary people a lot of things. Alchemy was not all done by spells. The factory of the magic network puppet also needed a lot of low-level labor, including polishing the parts of the golems, assembling the structure of the golems, arranging the rune routes and so on. These parts could be done by ordinary people. If a production line could be formed, then wizards only needed to be responsible for the most important activation and charging parts. I'm not going to open a school for nobles. Soren saw that the others still didn't understand, so he slowly explained, in short, you can think of it as a technical school. Except for the simplest knowledge of words, all the other categories are to learn some kind of technology. Such a school doesn't take too long to specialize. It will take a few months to a year or so. The students there can master one kind of technology, and then directly go to work in various positions in Mordor City. In this way, even ordinary families in Mordor City can afford it. Why was the prevalence of knowledge in the material plane so low? To a large extent, it was because ordinary families simply couldn't afford a labor force that could not bring any income to the family. That was why knowledge would circulate among merchants and noble families. What Soren wanted to do was to shorten this cycle. At present, Mordor City was under rapid construction, and low-end labor had gradually been replaced by golems. What he needed now was more technical labor. In this way, opening a technical school had become a very important part. A technical school with a learning period of half a year to a year could provide a steady stream of low-end and middle-end talents with a mastery of water conservancy, forging, engineering, alchemy, and other professions for Mordor. It was even more straightforward. At present, Mordor City no longer needed coolies. What Soren needed were workers. That's right. Workers, workers, workers. Important things must be said 3 times. The purpose of Soren's school was to train workers to meet the needs of a large number of low-end technical labor in the floating city in the future. Speaking of this, Soren paused, then looked at Saruman in front of him and said in a deep voice, regarding alchemy technology, everyone has seen the results of your research. So, I'll arrange for someone to do the specific construction of the school, but you'll still be the dean. If it's a preliminary plan, I'm going to recruit about 3,000 students from Mordor City. After graduation, these people will go directly to work in the arsenal, laboratory, and city hall of Mordor City. Gloria needed to be responsible for studying the floating space tower, Fallen Witch's focus was on the elemental furnace, and Alice was responsible for the golem factory. Soren naturally couldn't manage the school himself. So at present, the only person in Mordor City who had the energy to be the dean was probably Saruman, who was only in charge of an alchemy laboratory. Training workers was only the most basic plan. If this academy could really be set up, Soren would have even more talents to cultivate in the future. The professional academy had long been one of his ideas. Otherwise, there would be too many things to consider and the investment would be too great. He had already begun to plan for it. Some things must be considered in the current actual situation. Taking the residents of Mordor City as the standard, the family support to train a skilled worker was already the limit. It couldn't be helped. The foundation of the material plane was still too low. The whole thing was just the productivity at the end of the Middle Ages. Soren wanted to directly promote the education model of the modern period, which would probably require Mordor City to bear a considerable part of the financial expenses. A conservative estimate of hundreds of thousands of Kindler was indispensable. At present, he only hoped to see results as soon as possible. P.S. The first update. Today is the 3rd update. Chapter 860. Mordor City. Hammerstone Tavern. As a newly built tavern, the Hammerstone Tavern was not very lively, far less than other high-end taverns in Port Mordor. However, there was also a benefit of the tavern here, there were regular customers from military camps and munitions factories. Especially the Grey Dwarves of Mordor City, they liked the high-alcohol liquor here very much. Compared with other taverns, the Hammerstone Tavern was cheap. The wine glass was the size of a clay bowl, so most of the guests here were from the middle and lower levels of Mordor City. Today there were a lot of guests in the Hammerstone Tavern. However, unlike the bustle of the past, today's Hammerstone Tavern was full of whispers. Have you heard? The higher-ups are going to set up an academy. I heard that there are no requirements for admission. As long as you have a Mordor residence permit, you can enter. And you don't need to pay any tuition. I heard that the great Soren is going to let those noble wizards be teachers in person. Not knowing when it started, Soren in Mordor City was no longer just called Soren Sir. More and more people began to use the word great to describe Soren's achievements. Because all these changes were closely related to their lives, the lower-class civilians were actually very easy to be satisfied. They would remember who made their lives better and better. I know. I just heard about it today. A bearded man took a sip of wine and said, the city hall revealed the news early in the morning. But it's not all wizards. The city hall is recruiting other scholars and craftsmen as teachers. It is said that the Mordor Academy specializes in teaching some skills. But it's not completely free. The academy has fees, but if your family is in trouble, you don't have to pay first. After graduation, these tuition fees can be slowly paid off through work. As long as you can work in Mordor City, you can pay off the tuition fees in half a year at most. As a primitive era. At present, the material plane was still implementing the apprenticeship system, which was similar to ancient China. Even an ordinary craftsman apprentice would need 3 to 5 years to complete their apprenticeship, and during this period they would be free labor. In this era, a good craftsmanship could support a person for a lifetime. The ceremony of apprenticeship was very complicated in all aspects. It was also very common for apprentices to be beaten and scolded. Sometimes, if they met a bad master, it could take them more than 10 years to earn a living. Although Soren did not open a professional college, the current system in Mordor City was already changing the rules of reality. It could be said that as long as this academy system was established, the simple and primitive apprenticeship system in other places in the material plane would basically disappear from Mordor City, and the cultivation of talents would be more efficient. I know. The other man continued, "My nephew is about the same age. I've always wanted him to be a sailor, but he doesn't like drifting on the sea. I'm going to let him go in and learn something. I can also have an official job in Mordor City in the future. It's good that he can learn some useful skills at his age." Not everyone was qualified to be a professional. And being a professional was not as good as ordinary people thought, because professionals had to face more dangers. Many parents still wanted their children to live an ordinary life, not to join the army or drift on the sea. Mordor City now provided a lot of job opportunities, but there were very few capable people. Most of them were low-end coolies who sold labor. They used to be useful, but now there were more and more golems in Mordor City. These simple labor could be replaced by golems. At present, Mordor City needed more skilled talents. Yeah, I think so too. I'm going to send my son to learn how to build a ship. Mordor City is overseas. If you know how to build a ship, you don't have to worry about not having enough food to eat. I just don't know what Mordor City is going to teach at present. This time it was a tall and thin man who answered. But a man who looked like a patrol sergeant sitting behind them said in a low voice, "Not only that. I heard that Mordor City is going to select talents from the whole city who have the qualifications to become wizards and other professions this time. If your nephew can pass the test. Tisk tisk hey. That's great. They will definitely be the new rich of Mordor City in the future." Hearing this person's words, several other people could not help but be startled. Then they said in surprise, "Really?" Although the magic network had collapsed. But for ordinary people, wizards were still a high existence. Just look at the wizard Soren first faced in Amber City. In the eyes of ordinary people, wizards were almost the same as nobles. If someone in the nephew's generation could really become a wizard, then the status of the whole family could be improved in a straight line, and the future would definitely be much brighter. I still have a few nephews in Shipwreck Bay. Do you want to bring them here? It doesn't matter if they have talent or not. It won't take much time to go back and forth anyway. It was not a trivial matter to have a wizard in a family. In the past, most of the wizards were passed down internally. Very few people would spend a lot of effort to choose from ordinary people. Because becoming a wizard required knowledge as a foundation. A person who didn't even know how to read, even if they had high intelligence, could not learn spells at all. So in the past, there was no lack of people with wizard talent who were buried. Now that the magic network had collapsed, there was a very clear standard to measure. That was, if the innate intelligence did not reach more than 18 points, they would not be able to brew a trace of mana at all. In this way it would be much easier to select the top talents. There was a lot of discussion in the tavern. However, the most talked about topic was the recently established Mordor Academy. No matter what it was like inside, Soren's every move had already involved the thoughts of everyone in Mordor City. Everything that Soren had done in the past had already proved himself. The lower-class civilians were almost blind to Soren. When they heard that Soren was going to establish the academy, they immediately thought that it was a very promising thing. So now many people in Mordor City were preparing to send their younger generation to the academy. Even if they did not have a son, they wanted to send the talented and smart people and their relatives. Invisibly, the most promising group of newcomers in Mordor City gathered together with Soren's words. How many talents could be born in the future, how stable the foundation of Mordor City would be. P.S. The second update. There is another update today. Chapter 861. The wind was howling. Accompanied by a violent tremor, the broken wall in front of them collapsed with a loud bang. Then, a tall mutated lizard man appeared in front of everyone, and a petite figure was wandering around it. This petite figure was so agile that only afterimages could be seen when she moved, but when she attacked they could still vaguely hear a cat-like figure. Lulu, stop playing. The high priest stood calmly not far away. After a glance he slowly said, get rid of this guy. Let's continue to look for the entrance to the anti-magic prison. Meow. The petite figure landed on the ground and nodded. The next moment, 3 cold lights appeared. A terrible wound appeared on the lizardman's chest, and then it fell to the ground. If one looked carefully, one could see that a sharp blade had pierced its heart. Lulu's strength has improved very quickly. A pretty girl in a white priest robe walked out. She stroked Lulu's head lovingly and pinched her furry ears. So cute, she said with a smile. Lulu didn't seem to like being pinched. She hid behind the high priest, looked at her and whispered, Sister Milan's progress is really scary. Now she can use legendary divine spells. As she grew older, Lulu gradually began to show more characteristics of a werbeast. She had another combat form. After transforming into a werbeast, she would show a pair of sharp canine teeth. As a feline werbeast, Lulu's combat talent was very similar to that of a feline. It could be said that fighting was one of her instincts. Lulu received the training of an assassin like the drows. With the talent of a feline she was a little bit successful. She's a saint priest. She's not the same as ordinary mortals. The high priest glanced at Milan. Facing the calm eyes of the high priest, Milan was obviously a lot more cautious. Then the high priest slowly said, although the purpose of this trip is to explore the pirate island, it's also one of the tasks to train your ability so that you can enter the realm of legends as soon as possible. Don't be careless. According to my senses, there should be a lot of dangerous creatures nearby. There weren't many dangerous creatures on Pirate Island. After entering the island, the high priest split up the team. Because the island was too big, they had to spread out in order to gather information as quickly as possible. Lulu and Milan were in her team. The other team was made up of Ugly Monkey and Giant. Because of the high priest's psychic field, there was no need to worry about communication issues. If anything happened, the other team could immediately rush over to help. As a top-notch spirit warlock, the high priest's ability was even more useful than the technology of the interstellar era. High priest, we found a group of shark men. At this moment, Ugly Monkey's voice rang out in the psychic field. He seemed to be a little excited as he said, we found a passage near the northern coast of the island. But the road has already sunk. I suspect that this is the entrance to the anti-magic prison. Anti-magic prison. This was the most important purpose of their trip. For Soren, the wealth of the pirate island was not important. There were many ways to make money in Mordor, but the alchemy technology in the prison was very important, especially the use and development of the magic lock. Don't go in. The anti-magic prison is definitely more dangerous than you think. Wait for us to come over. Hearing this, the high priest was shocked and immediately said, I have confirmed your coordinates. We will be there in about 15 minutes. Pay attention to those sharkmen, don't disturb them easily. This island had been occupied by mutated creatures. Most of the creatures seen so far were marine species and amphibious creatures. Because of the high energy radiation, the monsters here were very powerful. It was difficult to see creatures below the higher grade. However, because of the high energy radiation, the minds of these creatures were a little crazy. They were like crazy and bloodthirsty primitive creatures, and some of their characteristics were even like demons. They were full of aggression. This was similar to the indigenous people. Because of the energy radiation, the indigenous people in the outer islands were more irritable by nature. Compared to other species, they were very aggressive and violent. The high energy radiation would cause problems for the creatures. This was the same for the elementals because a group of angry wind elementals appeared in the Amazon tropical forest because of the divine power of the Storm Lord. At present, the Amazon female warriors were annoyed by these wind elementals. The high priest and the others rushed over. When they arrived, the drows had already followed. In front of them was a group of sharkmen with amazing physiques. Unlike other sharkmen, the eyes of these sharkmen were red. They were entrenched near the coast, and a group of underwater buildings could be seen. This was their lair. Inside the lair, there was a passage that led directly to a crack in the bottom of the sea. At present, it was uncertain whether it was the entrance to the anti-magic prison. During the Great Catastrophe, there were violent earthquakes here. The Arcane Empire not only dabbled in the field of souls, but even the magnetic field inside the plane was also within their scope of research. During the Great Catastrophe, the chain-type collapse directly caused the energy magnetic field to become chaotic. Then there were many earthquakes inside the entire material plane. Some directly caused a small piece of land to split from it and then sink into the sea. The anti-magic prison was currently not visible on land. The biggest possibility was that it had sunk to the bottom of the sea because of the earthquake. Do you want to kill them all first? The giant's dull voice sounded, and he seemed to be eager to try. The high priest shook his head gently and said slowly, "There's no need to kill them all. Leave the priests inside for me to interrogate. There should be something useful." Hearing the high priest's words, the giant smiled and licked his lips. Then he carried the huge and heavy anchor and walked forward. After this period of battle, the group of people had gradually gotten used to each other. The giant was a very qualified meat shield. Not only was his skin thick, but he was also tall and strong. He was first class in attracting hatred. Although there was no legendary wizard because there was a level 30 psionic warlock, they might be more powerful than other legendary teams in a real battle. Because the high priest's psionic force field was already a kind of domain-type power, even in a battle they could communicate instantly without any delay. Unless someone's ability was stronger than her and could interfere or break the psionic force field, otherwise, they were almost invincible in a battle of the same level. PS, third update. The public WeChat advertising girl has been restored. Everyone can tease her when you have time. Chapter 862. The giant steadily advanced forward. Because of his special bloodline, Giant had chosen armored skin and epic strengthening as he advanced into the realm of legends. In theory, according to the natural growth of the HP of the giant species, which was higher than other species, and the HP bonus of the giant semi-purebred warrior, his total HP should be a little higher than Soren's. As a god, Soren's HP was close to that of a giant dragon's. Similarly, the giant's HP and strength were close to that of a giant dragon's. At this moment, the giant was like a city wall, successfully blocking the enemy's attack and keeping everyone outside the ship's anchor. With a good enough meat shield, the battle would be half won. Ugly Monkey and Lulu wandered around the giant, killing the injured sharkmen from time to time. As for the high priestess, she didn't make a move at all. Only the saint priestess, Miran, would cast some healing and buff spells from time to time. The drow warriors guarded the flanks. They did not join the battle directly, but scattered to block the enemy's retreat. The battle did not last long. These sharkmen were quickly defeated. A small portion of them abandoned their homes and fled into the sea, while the rest were captured. High priest. The giant carried a 2-meter-tall shark man like a chicken and threw him in front of the high priest. "This is the shaman you wanted. It's still alive." At this point, Giant pointed at the half-dead shark man on the ground and smiled embarrassedly. These sharkmen were too weak. It had almost squashed one of them to death by accident. As a giant warrior, its strength had increased at an astonishing speed after breaking through the legendary realm. It had already surpassed most of the swamp giants. The high priest gestured to Milan, the saint necromancer beside him, to cast a healing divine spell. Then, a trace of psionic radiance appeared in his eyes, directly controlling the spiritual will of the shark man in front of him. The high priestess was a level 30 psionic warlock. She alone was enough to eliminate these monsters because no one was immune to her mind control. If it wasn't for Soren, her stage would have been in the wider astral plane. The material plane was already too small for her. After a while, the high priest released the control on the shark man and said calmly, "Found it? It's in the underwater canyon ahead." But the shark man said that there are very scary monsters inside. "Get ready. We'll go down in the afternoon to see what's going on." Mordor City, Council Hall. The Mordor Academy was progressing in an orderly manner. When Soren proposed to let the wizards in Mordor City teach the students, they had no choice but to agree. There was only one day of class a week, so it wouldn't affect the wizards' time. As a teacher of Mordor College, they would also contribute. The city of Mordor would give them a corresponding rating according to the excellent students they taught. These contributions and ratings could be used to enter the big library of Mordor City, and the upper level of the library preserved a lot of spells and knowledge from the Arcane Empire. In a place south of the central square. At this time, a huge new building was being built. This was the expanded library of Mordor City. There were about 30,000 books stored in it, including astronomy, geography, history, literature, arcana, and so on. Most of the books were the private collections of Gloria and the Fallen Witch, and some were things that Soren found outside. Some books in the Arcane Tower were also transferred to the upper level of the library. In addition, there was an exhibition hall in the big library, where all kinds of cultural relics and antiques were placed. Soren made a relatively tight division in the library's authority. For example, the spell, Melf's Minute Meteor, could not be read in the big library without the corresponding authority and contribution. In order to encourage the wizards here to contribute more to Mordor City, Soren even put Time Stop, Banshee's Howl, Greater Chain of Accidents, and so on, including some supreme magic skills within the library's authority. It was just that it was more difficult to see them. To deal with wizards, you couldn't just attract them with money. Wizards were relatively rich. Even if their strength was greatly reduced now, many of them were not interested in money at all. The best way to attract wizards was to give them spells and knowledge that they didn't know so that they would be willing to work. At present, the Library of Mordor City saved most of the wizard's spells from the first circle to the ninth circle, and it also included several legendary spells as well as legendary-level supreme magic skills. Soren even included the process of making legendary thaling. As long as they reached the contribution point, they could learn it. This was also the reason why the wizards were willing to cooperate with Mordor Academy. Without these benefits in front of them, these wizards would definitely not be willing to contribute. In terms of the accumulation of arcana, Mordor City's foundation was still good. At present, there were 3 legendary wizards in Mordor City, namely Gloria, Fallen Witch, and Alice. Although Mordor City had risen not long ago, in fact, even in the Wizard Alliance, there were only 7 or 8 people who had advanced to become great wizards. There were even fewer legendary wizards in the Northern Witch Council. Except for Eye of the North, most of them were ordinary legendary wizards, and there were only 5 or 6 of them. The number of legendary spellcasters was very small. It was more difficult for them to break through the realm of legends than other professions. Most of the wizards stopped at the high grade, and then were forced to transform into liches or other creatures, relying on time to slowly become legendary spellcasters. For this kind of people, as long as they transformed into liches and did not die after hundreds of years, there would always be a time to advance to the legendary realm. Soren finalized the overall structure of Mordor City. Then he appointed Saruman as the Dean of Mordor Academy. As a new high-grade wizard, Saruman had divinity, and his strength would not be much worse than an ordinary legendary wizard. And Soren also needed to cultivate his management skills, because if he was promoted to a god in the future, Saruman would need to manage a church. In the blink of an eye, it was afternoon. When Soren finalized the basic structure of Mordor Academy, he was ready to see the progress of Gloria's research. However, at this moment he suddenly received a message from the High Priest for help. Anti-magic prison. Soren's mind suddenly reacted, and the next moment he directly opened the portal. Chapter 863. The anti-magic prison was a very dangerous place. Its difficulty was still within the range of the High Priest, but it was far beyond the endurance of the rest of the team. Soren prepared 2 backup plans at the beginning. The first backup plan was that if the enemy was not too strong, then Soren would descend on the St. Cardinal Milan as a god. The second plan was to deal with a very dangerous enemy. If the High Priest personally led the team and still couldn't defeat the enemy, then the High Priest would send a signal for help to Soren himself. Then Soren would use the High Priest as a teleportation guide to directly reach the battlefield. Soren received the signal for the second situation. The enemy was beyond the range of the High Priest, and the rest of the team were even in danger. The whole team was composed of the elite forces of Mordor City. The loss of any one of them was very serious for Soren, so he did not hesitate and directly opened the portal with his divine power. The next moment, Soren's figure appeared in the deep sea. Soren was a little unaccustomed to suddenly coming to the sea, but as a god, his ability to adapt to the environment was very strong. Soon he was as flexible as he was on land. Next to him was the High Priest, who acted as a teleportation guide. At this moment the rest of the team was quite embarrassed, especially the giant who acted as a meat shield. He even lost an arm. "What's the situation?" Soren frowned and glanced at the others present, and said in a deep voice, "What kind of monster did you encounter?" He waved his hand. With the appearance of the divine light, Soren directly healed the giant's injury with greater restoration, and then he saw that the broken arm was regenerating at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a high and mighty god, although Soren's strength had been greatly reduced because of the Avatar crisis and there was no way for him to cast resurrection at present, if it was only a physical injury and he was not dead, then he could save them in the blink of an eye. Even if he was cut in half, there would be no problem. The son of Dagon. The high priest also looked a little tired at this moment and slowly said, "My lord, there is a real son of Dagon below. It has a very strong spiritual force. All the devil fish in this area are under its control. The real son of Dagon?" Soren understood the gist of the situation. He frowned and said, "I'll go down and take a look. Follow me carefully." He had once encountered the son of Dagon. However, that was an existence that belonged to the inferior class, and could not be considered the true son of Dagon. Because the son of Dagon only inherited Dagon's bloodline and physique, he did not use many of the special abilities of the Orbis demons back then. Otherwise, it was almost impossible for them to win that battle because Dagon was best at chaotic battles and group battles. Since the high priest mentioned that he was the real son of Dagon, then the demons below him must have inherited a lot of power. Dagon had many children. As the most powerful aquatic demon lord, Dagon was an existence that could not be ignored in the ocean domain. His descendants were spread across many oceans in the multiverse, even near the Nether River. However, those places were much more dangerous. Some of the sons of Dagon had even reached the strength of a secondary demon lord, and the one in front of him was probably about the same level. Since the high priest was afraid of it, then it must have the power of a domain. The seawater was shrouded in a violent arcane energy. Soren was sure that the anti-magic prison was below because such strong energy radiation could only be produced in very few places. As Soren continued to go deeper, the devil fish began to appear around him. He did not see the son of Dagon yet, but he sensed a dangerous aura through the gods. The next moment, a row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. "You have entered the chaos domain. You are affected by the son of Dagon's chaos domain. All your tests of resistance have been affected by -2 negative status." It was indeed the son of Dagon who had a domain. At this time, Soren also saw a huge shadow entrenched in the depths of the underwater canyon. It had discovered Soren. Then another row of data appeared. "You are affected by the son of Dagon's nightmare spell. Test of resistance triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects. You are affected by the son of Dagon's enchanting curse spell. Test of resistance triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects. You are affected by the son of Dagon's enchanting insignia spell. Test of will triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects." A bunch of spell immunity data popped up. Soren could not help but frown. No wonder the high priest and the others could not defeat it. With the strength of the son of Dagon in front of him, perhaps other than the high priest, no one could be completely immune to so many control spells after entering the range of the chaos domain. All the control spells were ineffective. The son of Dagon seemed to have realized that Soren was stronger than any enemy it had ever encountered. Then it made a strange sound and a large group of devilfish emerged from the underwater canyon. There were probably hundreds of them and all of them rushed towards Soren. "Go away." Soren looked at the black mass of devilfish. In an instant, a golden light appeared in his eyes, and then he roared towards the front. Intimidation. Divine power conversion. Soren's roar formed a wave on the bottom of the sea, and then all the devilfish that rushed towards him trembled. Then, as if they had seen something extremely terrifying, they directly fled in all directions. Intimidation was successful. Soren's basic skill intimidation was as high as 575 points, which meant that he could directly rely on his own aura to disperse all the creatures below legendary. If one were to use data to describe it, it would be that the large group of devilfish in front of him directly turned from red to yellow because of Soren's intimidation. All the deep-sea monsters controlled by the son of Dagon were directly stunned by Soren's roar. The idea of relying on numbers to deplete Soren's strength failed, and the son of Dagon launched an attack on him in the next moment. Suddenly, huge tentacles emerged from the depths of the underwater canyon and entangled Soren from all directions. Strangle? Facing the ferocious tentacles, Soren rushed over with no expression. With a strange silver-white stream of light, all the tentacles were directly cut off wherever his figure went. Now he was no longer as strong as he was in the past. As an intermediate divine power god, and with a divine artifact in hand, even against an enemy like the son of Dagon, Soren could completely crush it. Chapter 864. The thick smell of blood permeated the seawater. Facing Soren, who was closing in, the son of Dagon was obviously panicking. As the descendant of the demon Orbis, the son of Dagon's most powerful weapon was its own body. Now that its body was powerless in front of Soren's divine artifact, the son of Dagon could only place its hopes on its innate ability as the demon Orbis. Along with a sharp roar, a strong spiritual attack was launched at Soren. Soren frowned slightly and waved his hand. Immediately, a divine barrier appeared in front of him. The seawater began to ripple violently. The spiritual attack of the son of Dagon could not shake Soren's divine barrier at all. In the next moment, Soren's figure flew out. A silver-white stream of light cut through the silent seabed. Soren directly attacked the son of Dagon from the front. Relying on his powerful divine artifact, he directly broke through all the tentacles. Then he waved his sharp blade and pierced into the son of Dagon's head. A row of data appeared in front of him. Son of Dagon, killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 3650000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 8 divine power. Little by little, the light of divine power merged into Soren's body. The son of Dagon had a lot of divine power. Although such an existence was powerful, it did not have a single divinity. What Soren needed the most at the moment was not divine power, but divinity to further stabilize his strength. Compared to the divine power that was becoming more and more common, divinity could only be obtained from special enemies. Now that Soren's divine power was as high as 230 points, it was more than twice the amount of divinity. For Soren, leveling up to greater divinity was not a problem. However, gathering enough divinity to level up to greater divinity was very difficult. He had to continue killing gods, and it had to be a god with intermediate divine power or above. Otherwise, he could only rely on large numbers to make up for it. Plop. Huge tentacles with a diameter of more than 3 meters fell to the bottom of the sea. Filthy demon blood seeped out from the body of the son of Dagon. The blood had a trace of fierce corrosiveness, and the nearby seabed plants withered. Dispel. Purify. A golden light of divinity appeared in Soren's palm, and the evil power that was polluting the seawater was purified by him. The son of Dagon occupied the entrance to the anti-magic prison. With its huge body, it was difficult to enter, so it occupied the place with the strongest radiation. Soren frowned as he stared at the huge corpse in front of him. He then cast a spell and forcefully moved the corpse away. A deep entrance appeared in front of him. This should be one of the important strongholds of the anti-magic prison. This was because Soren could feel a very strong energy radiation. It was probably as strong as when he found the elemental furnace last time. My lord. The figure of the high priestess also appeared behind Soren. Her eyes were full of awe at the moment because the son of Dagon, who blocked them outside, was so easily killed by Soren. Soren looked back at her, then glanced at the other members of the team and said, "You arrange for others to cut up the body of the son of Dagon and bring it up. Gloria and Karina's experimental research should be useful. High priestess. Milan. Giant. The 3 of you come with me into the anti-magic prison." The son of Dagon weighed more than hundreds of tons, and it was not easy to transport it up. Soren only took 4 people into the anti-magic prison because they were the only ones whose strength could be stable above the legendary level. They did not know what kind of monsters were inside the anti-magic prison. People who were not at the legendary level would die if they went in. Yes. The high priestess quickly followed the order and arranged for people to cut up and transport the body of the son of Dagon. The strength of the son of Dagon, who was killed by Soren, was equivalent to the strength of a lesser demon lord. It was similar to his demon incarnation, Sauron. There were many rare treasures on it. Light. A little bit of light appeared in Soren's palm. As the group entered the anti-magic prison, everything in front of them became clear. As an underground ruin sunk to the bottom of the sea, the interior of the anti-magic prison was very damaged. Soren could see many dilapidated buildings, most of which had collapsed. They had only moved forward a few hundred meters when they were blocked by a collapsed wall in front of them. Stone to mud. Soren waved his hand and cast a spell. Then he reached out and touched the wall gently. The wall in front of him turned into mud and scattered. A huge lavender crystal appeared in front of them. Soren had seen such a crystal in the ruins of the Battle of the Golems. He knew that he had entered the interior of the anti-magic prison. Rooms began to appear in front of them. There were many glass crystals. More than 90% of them were damaged. There were also incomplete bookshelves. The books in them were basically gone. Seawater covered the entire anti-magic prison. There was almost nothing intact. Soren walked around several rooms. Suddenly he seemed to feel something and walked toward one of the halls. A huge metal construct appeared in front of him. Elemental furnace? No. Soren glanced at it and was quite surprised. He murmured, "It's not like an elemental furnace. The energy radiation is all emitted from it. This is not an elemental furnace. It looks like a device for elemental fission." Soren's research on alchemy was not enough. He had to find a way to transport this thing back to Mordor and give it to Gloria to study. Alert! Alert! Intruder found. Activate Arcane Guardian. Destroy the intruder. There was a sharp metal sound and then one of the doors opened. Soren almost instantly entered battle mode. He waited for a while but still did not see the figure of Arcane Guardian. Soren thought for a while and carefully approached the door. Then he saw a puppet golem that had been buried underground for a long time. There was a red arcane glow on its body, but most of its body had been broken. This was the bottom of the sea and not on land. There were very few things in the entire anti-magic prison that could function normally. Where is the magic lock? Soren walked around the ruins and frowned. Under normal circumstances, a place like the anti-magic prison must have a magic lock. So where is the core of the magic lock? Is it because it's not activated? Soren walked through the rooms one by one and saw many strange devices, but most of them had failed. On the way he also encountered a few guardian golems that could still function, but they were easily taken care of by him. After confirming that there were no dangerous enemies in the entire underground ruins, Soren prepared to return to the pirate island. A teleportation circle would soon be built here, and then the manpower and material resources of Mordor City would be invested in it. Most of the devices in the anti-magic prison would be transported back to Mordor City. Perhaps only Fallen Witch and Gloria could distinguish which ones were related to the magic lock. Chapter 865. The preliminary cleaning of the anti-magic prison was completed. Soren brought a small part of the intact alchemy runes to the land. He did not rush back to Mordor City but waited for Gloria's arrival. Gloria arrived by teleportation around dusk. Fallen Witch was half an hour later than her, and Roland did not know why she was delayed, but her expression seemed a bit strange today. Unlike Soren, who looked at the pile of alchemy runes, Gloria and Fallen Witch couldn't help but be surprised when they saw these things. They carefully took it apart and studied it. At the same time, they instructed the apprentices beside them to constantly record something. In their eyes, this pile of severely damaged equipment was like an incredible treasure. Even some of the fine rune engravings on it were carefully copied down. Okay. Soren had to admit that he was not a pure scholar, and he could not understand the runes on these alchemy runes at all. As if knowing Soren's doubts, Gloria took time to look at him, gently lifted her long hair and said, "According to the degree of damage of these alchemy devices, we can basically be sure that the magic lock has been closed. The energy supply devices are all damaged. The magic lock only relies on self-replenishing energy to maintain operation for at most 100 years, and this place has been buried for thousands of years. The core of the magic lock should be silent somewhere on the bottom of the sea. Next, we need a lot of manpower to salvage it. According to the preliminary judgment, there will be a complete magic lock below, and it will be very large, larger than the magic lock of the Arcane Tower. The range of the magic lock is estimated to cover half of the island of Mordor. The anti-magic prison was an island. The magic lock here was naturally larger than that of an ordinary arcane tower. Gloria judged the range of the magic lock according to the number of alchemy devices, and the next salvage would be in this range. Fallen Witch next to her was not interested in the magic lock. She was studying devices similar to elemental fission. It's a bit different from elemental furnace. Fallen Witch looked at the crystal rune in front of her and murmured, "But the energy supply must be larger. This thing needs to be repaired before we can confirm whether it's an elemental fission device." The anti-magic prison required a large amount of energy. This was a very special place where many evil arcanists had been imprisoned. In order to maintain the seal on them, the magic lock had to be operated at full power. Therefore, the energy supply device must be very advanced, probably as much as the energy consumption of a floating city. Since all of you are here, then I'll leave this side to you. I'll go back and send more people over. Soren was bored after watching for a while. He could learn spells, but calmly studying such a complicated alchemy rune wasn't his style. Fortunately, Gloria and Fallen, which were experts in this field. Now that they had arrived in Soren, there was no need for Mordor to stay here. Gloria, who had been immersed in researching new things, had no objections to this. What she wanted to do the most right now was to move everything from the anti-magic prison up. As soon as he returned to Mordor City, Soren seemed to have noticed something. The next moment, his figure appeared directly in Vivian's room. During this time, Vivian had been integrating the power of divinity given by Soren. It was very difficult for a native to become a demigod. It was not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. Soren's speed of integrating divinity and divinity was like cheating even for a god. At this moment, a trace of pain appeared on Vivian's delicate little face. Her whole body was suspended in midair, and the dissipating power of fear formed a barrier, isolating the surrounding space. Vivian's body was changing. From the bloodline of the deity to the bloodline of the demigod. But just as she was about to succeed, a little accident happened. The will of the Dreadlord came. At this time, in Soren's eyes, Vivian's figure was suspended in midair, and behind her was a ferocious shadow of the Dreadlord. This shadow could not be seen by the naked eye, but for Soren, who was in the form of a god, he could perceive any trace of spiritual will and special existence on the soul. The Dreadlord finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Just when Vivian was about to integrate the power of divinity and become a demigod, he launched an attack on Vivian, trying to invade her mind and seize control of her body. This was a seed that was engraved on the soul. It had been left as early as the moment Vivian was born. Even Soren had no way to erase it. If the Dreadlord succeeded, then Vivian would disappear completely, and the Dreadlord would be reborn in her body. Not only could he take back his divinity and divine power, but he could also absorb Vivian's power. Finally can't take it anymore? A cold murderous intent appeared in Soren's eyes. Without hesitation, he reached out his finger and gently touched Vivian's forehead. The Dreadlord was dead. His remaining divine power was not enough for a direct resurrection, so he could only attack Vivian at the most critical moment, trying to destroy Vivian's spiritual will in one fell swoop. This mark was left on her mind and soul. Soren instantly realized the Dreadlord's plot. The next moment he activated his divine form and directly entered the spiritual space where Vivian's soul was trapped. Time froze at this moment. Vivian's painful expression seemed to have disappeared, and a surprised smile appeared on her delicate little face. At this time, a ray of light appeared on Soren's body. A little bit of divine light merged into Vivian's body and turned into an invisible shadow that directly entered Vivian's body. Soren directly invaded the world where the Dreadlord was trying to trap Vivian in his spiritual form. The wind was howling. The whole world was gray, and a gloomy atmosphere shrouded everything, inexplicably making people feel a sense of panic. In the center of the whole world was a huge throne. Countless demons gathered around the throne, but none of them dared to approach it. Big brother. Big brother. At this time, a ray of golden light suddenly appeared in the sky, and then a shadow shrouded in divine light directly fell on the throne. The shadow gradually turned into a solid body, and Soren's figure appeared in the center of the throne. At this moment he looked as if he was facing a great enemy, but the next moment he was stunned. This was because he saw two identical Vivians on this throne that was constructed purely out of divine power. What the hell? What's going on? Why are there two identical Vivian in the spiritual world? At this moment, Soren suddenly became a little confused. Because in the eyes of the gods, the two Vivian souls were the same. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.